We said this would be just a quest. It is just a quest, he smiled at her. And don't look now, but the twins, Margit and Milla, have just seen you. Milla is going to want to know all about your sword. All she wants to do is follow in Haakon's footsteps. But Margit is quiet and bookish. She won't say much. And then there's Arne. Who's more interested in farming than in women? He won't even notice you're here. Tormund. The last cousin is Linnea, but she's probably out in the fields with the horses still. She's the only one who won't question how long you've been in love with me for. She'll want to know if you can ride. Tormund. Bryn grabbed his arm. She'd been right. This was a trap. What? Your family can't think there's anything between us. Why? He gave her that faint smile that dared her to play with him. When we part ways, they'll never see you again. They'll probably mutter that you were never good enough for me anyway. And then they'll try and invite me to gatherings where one of their friends just happens to be searching for a husband. But you shall never have to see their censure. Why does it bother you? She swallowed. Because they're your family. I don't want... Yes? She stared at him. She didn't have the answer for that. He was right. These people would be strangers to her. But they weren't strangers to him. And despite everything, she didn't want them to think poorly of her. It was clear that Haakon's family was desperately important to Tormund, and some foolish little part of her wanted them to like her. Tormund waited patiently for her to form the words, and for the first time in her life, she couldn't find the courage. I don't want them to hate me. Afterward. Thought darkened his eyes, but he merely nodded. As you wish. And then he turned and strode toward the largest house at the end of the lane, his shoulders set and square, like a warrior walking to his doom. Before he could even knock, a woman opened the door breathlessly, her greying hair bound back by a red kerchief. Her eyes slid over the pair of them, as if looking for someone else, but then she rushed forward and hugged Tormund. "Oh, my boy!" she cried, squeezing him so hard he actually grunted. "Where have you been? Where is my son?" She drew back and poked him in the ribs. "You are far too skinny. Who has been feeding you?" "Aunt Brunhild." Tormund dutifully kissed her cheek. "If I'm skinny, it's because your son is a terrible cook, and he's had to return to Iceland in a hurry. Though if he knew we were coming here, he would have wanted to linger." The woman huffed and puffed, circling Tormund and pinching his sides. "Haakon has been running you ragged. I can see it all over you." "He has." Tormund gave her soulful eyes. "Barely feeds me, barely lets me sleep. We've been off hunting dreki princes, and you know how he gets." "Bah, I thought his new wife would put a stop to such matters." "So did I." He played the poor, beleaguered cousin with such consummate grace, Bryn suffered a moment of actual sympathy for Haakon. "And who is this?" The woman graced Bryn with a radiant smile. Immediately Bryn could see where Haakon got his grey eyes from. But where his were cool and calculating, his mother's sparkled with curiosity. "This is Bryn," Tormund said, "my travelling companion." "Travelling companion?" It sounded so innocent. It sounded like the jaws of a trap about to snap shut. "I'm another dreki hunter," she told the woman before Tormund could explain her presence. "Tormund and I are currently working together to track a missing dreki princess who passed through this way yesterday or the day before." "Bryn's an excellent warrior," Tormund added. Brunhild gave Tormund an inscrutable look. "You must be hungry. Come in. I will fetch your cousins, and we shall all dine together." "Oh, no," Tormund held up his hands. "That's not necessary. The girls will be busy. They have children, husbands, homes to tend." "Nonsense!" Brunhild put her hands on her hips. "The pair of you have been gone for so long that we barely remember what you look like. Dragon princess or no dragon princess, you will come inside this house and dine with your family, my boy, or I shall box your ears." "Dreki," Tormund coughed. "Haakon's wife will take offence if you call her a dragon." "Tormund!" Though a part of Bryn felt a little wary of this entire excursion, she couldn't help but find herself charmed. Tormund looked like a 10-year-old boy chastised for dragging dirt inside the home. "Of course," Bryn interceded. "We would love to dine with your family. I'm sure they have many questions for Tormund, and with night falling, we can't continue our journey." Brunhild brightened considerably. "Excellent. I shall send word. Come inside, come inside." "It's not as though you need to send word." Tormund glared down the village street. "Nora and Leah are still peering through their windows." "Stop grumbling and take your boots off." Brunhild vanished inside the home. "Smile," Bryn told him. "Don't you laugh," Tormund told Bryn with a scowl as he gestured her inside. "You're the one who's going to be subjected to the famous Haraldsson Inquisition. And let me assure you, lesser women have trembled." "I'm not afraid of anything, big man." "No?" He leaned closer, resting his hand on the small of her back. "Trust me when I say that I would rather face 100 Draugr than Haakon's curious sisters." Bryn rolled her eyes. "Then you've never lived with a hall full of Valkyrie with nothing better to do than polish their swords. There are no secrets in Valhalla." "Polish their swords?" He brightened. "Is that a—" "No." She rolled her eyes and shoved him through the door. "We call that strumming the lute." Dinner was a raucous affair. Each of Haakon's sisters brought some part of the meal with them, scolding him all the while for such an impromptu gathering, though Tormund could tell they didn't mean it. Their husbands leaned back in chairs, sipping ale and talking of the weather and crops, and through it all, numerous children ran and giggled. Little Kari sat by herself, quietly reading her favourite book, and Tormund stopped beside her to greet her with a smile and a few questions about the book. "Hello, my favourite," he said. "Look at you. You've grown an inch." "Hello," Kari replied, though her finger kept tracing the pretty illustration in the book and she didn't look up. "I bought you a gift," he said, reaching inside his shirt. "But don't tell the others. It's a special gift, just for you." She glanced at the wooden puzzle he'd found in a market some time ago, and then looked back to the book. She liked little curiosities and clever little tricks, but he recognized her absorption and merely sat the puzzle to the side where she'd be able to see it once she'd finished her book. "If you want, I can bring you some bread." She'd made a little nest in the corner with her favourite blanket, and someone, possibly her mother, Leah, had tucked one of the chairs in front of her so she had her own little fort. "Yes, please." Kari glanced at the busy dining table the same way he looked at stairs. "And potatoes. I want potatoes." Tormund dutifully complied before leaving her to her peace. It was good to be home. "So," Nora said, handing around slices of bread and butter as Tormund sank into his chair. She settled an emotionless gaze upon Bryn that could have beat Haakon at his best. "How long have you been riding with Tormund?" Bryn chewed thoughtfully on her slice of lamb, then swallowed. "Perhaps 2 weeks now. There was a quest we were both working, and it made sense to complete it together." 2 weeks, Nora smiled blandly, and passed the bread to Leah with a penetrating look. Tormund kicked her under the table. "You hunt dragons and kraken too?" Leah gave her the sweetest smile. "I'm a mercenary," Bryn told her bluntly. "I beard dragons in their dens and guard caravans of exotic items. I patrol warehouses when I'm paid to do so. I also accompany brides on their way to their prospective husbands. Sometimes I help them escape when the marriages are not to their satisfaction. And occasionally I hunt men who have stolen from villages, or worse." "And bring them to justice?" Leah asked. Bryn paused, taking another thoughtful sip of her ale. "No, I bring justice to them." All the women nodded in approval, and Brunhild handed her a bowl of roasted potatoes with a smile. "More," she insisted. "You must have a big appetite for such a strapping lass." Tormund put a hand over his face. "Aunt." My gods, this was worse than he'd expected. "What?" Brunhild asked. "She is big and beautiful and has wonderful hips. And if my Håkon has been running you ragged, he has probably not had time to feed her either." Bryn stared at the potatoes as though she wasn't sure what her hips had to do with it. He knew. Oh, he knew. "Many babies with those hips," Brunhild said, stabbing a potato and putting it on Bryn's plate. She added 2 more. "And they will be easy births." "Mother!" Even Leah seemed aghast. Tormund sank his face into his hands. If he was lucky, Bryn would only flee into the night, never to be found again. "I do not think I will have children," Bryn replied slowly, as though trying to work her way through a potentially dangerous conversation. "I'm a warrior." "It does not mean you will not be a mother too," Brunhild said with a shrug. "Some of the women here are farmers, some are fighters, some have children, some do not." She finally seemed to realize what she'd been saying. "You will have easy births if you choose to have children. That is all. I know these things." It was not good to be home. "How did you learn to fight?" Miller demanded, and thanked the gods for smaller, bloodthirsty cousins. "Who taught you the sword? Did you find it? Did you steal it?" Bryn gave her a smile as if relieved to be drawn into a subject she could safely answer. "A sword like this is never found. It can only be earned. It was my mother's once upon a time." Tormund swished a mouthful of ale. She rarely spoke of her past and deflected comments about it whenever they were made. Considering her history as a Valkyrie, he still knew relatively little about them and their kind. "And she taught me how to use it," Bryn continued, deftly stabbing a 4th potato and putting it on her plate, much to Brunhild's satisfaction. Bryn and Mila exploded into a conversation about the art of swordcraft, and he could see his cousin's eyes getting bigger and bigger. The jury, the rest of his cousins, might still regard her with some suspicion, but Bryn had definitely won a convert. "I can give you a lesson in the morning if you're awake early enough," Bryn finally suggested. Miller's eyes lit up. "Really? Oh, I'll be awake. I have my father's old sword, the one Håkon gave me to spar with. He was starting to teach me how to use it before he left, but he hasn't been home for such a long time." "I will give you some exercises to work through by yourself," Bryn said. Mila would barely sleep a wink that night. "You've been quiet," Leah muttered in his ear as Bryn started describing the different ways a woman fought as compared to a man. "Though you can't take your eyes off her." He swiftly lowered his gaze. "She's a tall, strapping lass." "With wide hips," Nora muttered on the other side of him. "I can't believe Mother said that." Leah dug her elbow into his ribs as she leaned across him for the bread. Mother likes her. Leah clearly wasn't so sure. She's a good companion, he replied with a nonchalant shrug. She fights well, she doesn't snore, and she's braver than any woman I've ever met. Thinks beards are the devil's work, though, so she has her flaws. It will be sad to see her leave when we finish this quest. She's quite handy. Oh, please, Leah snorted. You're fooling no one. Every time you look at her, your heart is in your eyes, and she's going to break it. He pinched her on the thigh. Don't make me tip the potatoes in your lap. I dare you. Leah's eyes spat fire. Mother's still not forgiven either of us for that last fight we had. Leah's right, Nora murmured. I know you, Tor. You've been searching for someone to love your entire life. You've always wanted something epic, something like what Håkon has. And as soon as you met Bryn, I have no doubt you fell head over heels. It took me a day or two. Is there anything wrong with that? He growled. Nora kissed his cheek. You've always been afraid to be alone. You've always been afraid to be left behind. And I know my brother has found happiness. I know his life, and yours, has changed. He's married to a dragon princess now. Dreki, for goodness sake. And Håkon's story is epic. I hear the men down at the tavern speak his name in hushed tones. You've idolized him for years, and now his path is diverging from yours. Don't throw yourself into something just because you're afraid to lose him. Be certain, be sure. You deserve the best, Tor, and as much as I hate to agree with Leah, I think your lady love has her shields firmly in place. When Bryn looks at you, she looks like you just uncovered her mortal weakness. And when you look at her, you look like you're on your knees, offering her your heart on a plate. Don't beg for some small scrap of her affection. That's the wounded, angry boy we once knew. You're the man we love, and you are worthy of more. Tormund stared into his ale, swallowing hard. Not once had he felt doubt when it came to Bryn, even when she'd told him that she was leaving when this quest was done, even when she'd warned him that she would break his heart. He'd told himself that, if he was patient enough and gave her time, that she might come to feel the way he felt about her. But Nora's words cut the feet right out from under him, and he saw himself as a boy, that angry, lonely boy, who craved kindness and loyalty, oh so much. The boy who watched Håkon from a distance, both worshipping him and hating him. The boy who learned to be funny so people would like him. The boy that gave his heart to his new family so completely, so desperately, that he could barely breathe sometimes. You love hard, Tor, Nora whispered, but don't forget to demand that kind of love in return. Acceptance is not enough, not for you. The children came running by at that moment, little Matilda and Axel. He snatched them up, tossing them over his shoulder and tickling them under the arms in order to hide the stab of pain in his chest. And it was easy to slide his smile in place, easy to hide the gaping wound in his heart. They're supposed to be going to bed soon, Leah told him in an exasperated voice, rescuing little Matty from his tickling kraken monster. He winked at her. Oh, I know. Perhaps they'd like to hear the scary tale of the 3 Draugr we fought. No! Nora and Leah both exclaimed. Then behave, he mouthed to them, and I will too. Nora squeezed his hand. Well, Leah said, pushing back her chair with a squeal. As lovely as this has been, I think it's time to put the little ones to bed. Kari looks like she's starting to get a little overwhelmed by the horde, and I'm sure Bryn and Tormund need to get some rest for their journey tomorrow. Mila's face fell. Really? Really, Leah told her. The sooner you sleep, Bryn called from across the table, the sooner we can spar. Mila brightened immediately. Do you have room for both of them? Leah asked, turning to her mother innocently. Well, I've only got one room. Brunhild frowned, as if in thought. I've put all the spare furniture in the others, and my sewing is in Hawkins' room, and we can sleep in the barn, Tormund said in an irritable voice. It's what we're used to. Good heavens, no! Leah looked aghast. Nora's jaw dropped open. The barn? I'll have you know that my spare room— Bryn shot him a bemused look. The barn will be fine. Half a dozen voices rose in protest until Brunhild held up her hand. The barn will be fine, she said. Every single one of his cousins looked at Brunhild as if she'd sprouted a dragon's head. To house a guest in the barn was scandalous. To allow a family member to stay there was something that would have horrified Brunhild if someone else dared suggest it. Even Tormund arched a brow. Clearly his cousins weren't the only ones matchmaking. The barn will be fine, he told his aunt, tipping his head toward her. Maybe those words would reveal his hand, but Tormund was never one to look a gift horse in the mouth. You understand why I prefer to hunt dragons? Tormund asked, resting his head on the palm of his hand as he lay sprawled on a bed he'd made in the hay. Bryn glanced at him, splayed there for her viewing pleasure. She'd always considered a man's arms his best feature, and with his biceps flexed like that, she was having trouble keeping her gaze to herself. I think they're lovely. Curious, nattering busybodies, he said with a scowl. Leah and Nora are the worst. They compete to see who can manage the family the most. Bryn turned away, trying to shield her expression. He didn't know how carelessly he spoke of his family. It was evident they loved him, and he them, but he didn't treasure them as he should. There are many people who may look at what you have and consider them a gift, not a burden. Stripping off her trousers, she heard him shift behind her and knew her tone had been too sharp, too revealing. Do you have family? He asked. She leaned forward and blew out the lantern, plunging them into darkness. I did. Once. Shimmying out of her shirt, she stripped her bindings from her breasts and then slipped beneath her blankets. Once upon a time, she would never have lain naked beside a man like this, but she knew he wouldn't touch her without her permission. I never thought about that, he murmured in the darkness, rolling toward her. You're hundreds of years old, and here I am, regretting what you don't have. My family was never like yours. Her mother would never have cooked her dinner like that, nor would she have greeted any prospective suitor who sat at her table with politeness. Men made you weak, and food was a matter of necessity, not a social gathering. You ate to survive, you slept in your barracks, and there were frequent tests to prove your worth. Sometimes her mother had sent her out into the snow to survive for weeks on end. Only a weak daughter desired blankets and warm food. If you couldn't kill it, then you didn't eat, and if you didn't eat, then you couldn't fight. You never complained. You never desired more. To serve your God as his chosen warrior was the only calling you could ever aspire to, and even then, you would always have to prove yourself. She was Kara of Valmar's daughter, and she was not weak. You don't speak of your family often, he murmured, and she sensed the blankets shifting at her back. Actually, you don't speak of them at all, nor your past. Bryn closed her eyes. What is there to say? I was Valkyrie, and now I am not. I have no home. I have no family. Mortal blood flows through my veins. All I have is this. Your blood is not weak, Bryn. A hand came to rest upon her hip through the roughened blanket. You're the most amazing woman I have ever met. Her heart caught in her chest. He barely knew the truth. He was still looking at her through a fantastical gaze, seeing something that wasn't there. She rolled onto her back, looking up at him in the moonlight. When this is over, I will walk away, and I will never think of you again. I won't regret leaving you, Tormund. He leaned down, brushing a soft kiss to her mouth. I know. Did you not hear me? She demanded, her heart beating a little fast in her ears. He held himself above her, resting on his elbows. I heard you, but I don't think your words were meant for me. I think you're trying to remind yourself. She sucked in a sharp breath. He was such an infuriating man. Do you always have to sound so certain? He hovered over her, the thin stream of moonlight picking out the contours of his jaw as her eyes grew accustomed to the dark. I'm not certain sometimes, Bryn, especially about you. He hesitated. But maybe if I say it enough times, then some god will hear me and breathe life into my wishes. Maybe this one time I will get what I've always wanted. Bryn's breath caught in her chest. There was no sign of his usual self-deprecating air. And what do you want? He kissed her, sweetly, and it was answer enough. I want to matter, he finally said, lifting his mouth from hers. I want someone to fight for me, someone to think me worthy. You are worthy of them. I want forever in someone's arms. I want something of my own, a home, a family, a life, love, forever. Bryn couldn't move, couldn't breathe. She stroked her fingertips against his lips as tears sprang to her eyes. And I want someone who is willing to fight for me, he finally said, bending down but not quite kissing her. I will give my heart, Bryn, without reservation. But if I had one wish in the world, it would be this: for someone to love me the way that I love them. And then he captured her mouth with a heated kiss, as if he couldn't bear to hear her answer, because not even Bryn knew what it would be. 22. Morning came, and with it the need to be on the road. Bryn packed their bags and hauled them down the ladder in the barn. Tormund had gone ahead to ready the horses. She hadn't seen him since she'd sparred with Miller, though he and Leah had leaned on the fence and watched the pair of them hack at each other. And maybe it was for the best. If I had one wish in the world, it would be this. She stood breathlessly at the base of the ladder, clinging to the last rung. Every smile he flashed made her heart skip a beat. Every time she heard his deep voice, a little shiver ran through her. Every kiss, every caress, every whisper of his skin on hers, all of it sought to ruin her. But it was those words that did the most damage, because, curse her for a fool, they weakened her more than he could ever know. "Lift your shield!" The sound of her mother's voice barked in her memories. "Do you want to be weak? Who are you? Some pathetic mortal girl who can barely swing a sword? Or my daughter, Kara of Valmar's daughter? Are you Valkyrie, or a snivelling human?" Each ringing blow of her sword had forged her future. "I am Valkyrie," she had screamed as she swung the sword again and again and again. Bryn opened her eyes, swallowing hard. "Who are you?" she whispered into the darkness of the barn. But there was no answer, except for the faint shuffle of footsteps behind her. Bryn swung around, clapping a hand to her chest as one of Tormund's cousins appeared in the shadows. "By all the gods, girl! You nearly gave me a seizure. What are you doing here?" A tumble of red curls gleamed in the sunlight that streamed through the barred windows as the girl flashed her sword a determined look. "I wanted to see your sword." She couldn't have been more than 8 or 9. Kari, if Bryn remembered correctly. Bryn knelt, drawing her sword from its sheath. "It's very sharp." The little girl focused on the blade, tracing her fingers over the hilt before they dipped to the runes etched into the steel. "You probably shouldn't touch that," Bryn murmured, though she was loath to take the sword away. The child seemed absorbed by the runes. "What are these?" Kari asked. Bryn tilted the sword to display them properly. "They're a blessing from the gods," she said, pointing to a pair. "This begs for strength from Freya, so your shield arm will always be strong. And this is Odin's mark, a sign that he is watching over you." She worked her way down each rune. Strength, speed, boldness, courage, valor. And above all, honor. To honor your gods, to honor your sisters, to honor yourself. It was this mark alone which was tattooed on the spine of every Valkyrie. Bryn's finger slowed. They'd burned that tattoo from her skin. No matter how many years passed, she still felt the shame of her past twist deep within her. "I do not know this language," Kari said with a frown, her little finger tracing the rune for courage. "I know Elder Futhark and Younger Futhark, but not this." "That's because it is the language of the gods, and not meant for mortal eyes." The little girl's red curls tumbled over her forehead, and she wore an expression of such seriousness that Bryn instinctively reached out and traced the rune for protection on her forehead. Kari stilled, and as Bryn's finger finished the last flourish, she swore the rune flared gold and then sank within the girl's skin. Both of them stared at each other in shock, though Kari's gaze darted away. But it was the catch of breath in her chest that froze Bryn. Freya's touch. She could almost feel the goddess breathing down her spine, feel the power tingling in her finger. There was no sign of the goddess's magic when she turned her hand this way and that, but she'd seen it glittering along her fingers. She could have sworn she'd seen it. Which meant the goddess had not forsaken her after all. Bryn pushed to her feet unsteadily, wiping her suddenly sweating palms on her trousers. What did this mean? She thought the gods had turned their backs on her long ago. Wind swept through the stables, blowing the doors open. It swirled among strands of loose straw, and Bryn could have sworn she heard the sound of dozens of voices singing. The words sounded like a chorus of Valkyrie rousing to battle. "What is that noise?" Kari whispered, rocking slightly. "My past coming to haunt me again." But she sheathed the sword as she saw Leah enter, her face lightening when she saw her wayward daughter. "I think it's coming from the gods," Bryn said solemnly. "They felt me mark my blessing on your forehead, and now they're watching over us. Both of us." Kari caught a glimpse of her mother and then ducked into one of the stalls. "I can still hear it," she called. Leah paused to lean on one of the stools as Kari went in search of the music. I see you have made another convert. Bryn dusted off her hands again. It was clear the other woman was not among those who welcomed her with open arms, and while Bryn had faced 1,000 battles in her time, she felt awkward now, when she had no shield but her tongue and her wits. She's very clever, Leah sighed. She is, and now I'm going to be finding those runes carved into every door jamb in my house and written on every piece of paper or fabric she can get her hands on. It will bring Freya's protection upon your house. Leah shot her a startled look. You worship the old gods? She hadn't missed the cross hanging around Leah's throat. Yes. I don't know what my husband will think of having old runes carved into the house, but I will thank them for their protection. Leah shrugged, then reached down to haul Tormund's packs over her shoulder. I will help you. Kari, don't you go too far. Thank you. Bryn grabbed her own bags and followed the other woman toward the barn doors, though she could have carried all 4 bags easily. Tormund had seemingly given up on saddling the horses. He snatched a pair of children up under each arm and then went looking for another, roaring like a dreki the whole time. Packs of children lurked, waiting desperately to be snatched up, even as they screamed and bolted. It was such foolishness, and yet Bryn couldn't help smiling. This was his home. She could see it in the relaxation that rode his shoulders and the flash of his smile. A somewhat breathless feeling took her as she watched him trip into the grass and fall prey to a pack of giggling children who tickled him unmercifully. She would miss him when she was gone. Desperately. Urgently. And though she was surrounded by dozens of people, she didn't think she had ever felt as lonely as she watched him from a distance, knowing he would be gone soon. Not even when she had woken in the mortal realm after being cast from Valhalla. He's wonderful with the children, Leah said, startling her back into the present, and Bryn felt her gaze like a hawk's. But then, he is wonderful with all of us. She looked away. He is lucky to have all of you. We are lucky to have him, Leah corrected. She paused. Has he told you of his brother and father? Brother and father? Bryn's head whipped to the side. No, he's only ever spoken of his mother. I thought his father was a nameless mercenary. Ah. Leah sat the packs by their horses, stroking the roan's rump. It's complicated. His mother had borne one son to her husband, and everyone in the district thought it a gift from God, for her husband was almost thrice her age. Old Sigurd praised that boy every day of his life, and Thomas took after him in almost every way. They were both short, miserly men who never granted poor Ruth a single ounce of their attention or love. And then, when Thomas was almost 16, Ruth birthed a second child, an enormous squalling infant with such dark hair that we all joke that he was born with a beard. There were whispers then, for Sigurd could barely leave the house without a cane, let alone... Leah shrugged. And of course, that was the summer there were several mercenaries roaming at the inn. But for all his faults, Sigurd gave the boy his name, Tormund Sigurdsson. And though he never gave Tormund an ounce of the attention he paid Thomas, it mattered little, for he died barely 2 years later. Bryn couldn't look away. Sigurdsson. Not once had he spoken of that name. Not once. By the time Ruth passed, Tormund was almost as tall as his brother. Thomas took him in as it was his Christian duty, but he and his wife never let the boy forget that his arrival had shamed both Sigurd and Ruth. You'd often see Tormund roaming the streets in old cast-off clothes, half-fed, bruised, covered in dirt, Thomas said the boy was wild, and maybe he was. But if so, then he was taught to be that way. And it was only 5 or 6 years later that we realized Thomas had long disowned him. He'd been feeding himself for nearly a year, and he was an angry little thing. When Håkon brought him home, I thought he'd near eat us out of house and home. But my mother was so angry that he'd been left to fare for himself that she didn't mind. Leah looked Bryn in the eye. And yet, for all of that, he is the kindest, gentlest man I have ever met. But you should understand why we all hope for the best for him. Tormund deserves a kinder future than the past he has led. It was a warning, though not the one she'd expected Leah to provide. And for the first time, she couldn't find it in herself to deny the truth between them. Not right now, when she'd been staring at him as if she could feel him being torn from her grasp. He does, she said softly. He deserves to be loved. He deserves everything. If I had one wish in the world, it would be this, for someone to love me the way that I love them. Those words pierced Bryn through and through, for despite his smiles, there was a yearning within him that she feared she couldn't slake. It has never been Tormund or his feelings that I doubt. He deserves someone better than me. There, she'd said it. He would love her because he wanted to love her. She knew it as surely as she knew her name. But would it last forever? Would she ever be able to cast aside the feeling that she didn't deserve it? How could she prove herself worthy when she felt so utterly wretched inside? Liar, thief, betrayer. She had played all of those parts in the last 100 years. She had turned from the gods, turned from the role her mother had always dreamed for her. But then, had she ever truly filled that role either? She'd tried so hard, but even when she'd won a dozen challenges, 100, she'd always somehow felt unworthy of her mother's love. She'd always felt as though she played a part, and that someday she would fall down. Maybe Rota had merely showed her the truth, that she was unworthy. Of her mother, of her sisters, of the gods. And now, of Tormund. A hand found hers, and Bryn realized she was staring at him through a blur of unshed tears. Gods! She never cried, but Leah's gentle squeeze seemed to wreck her from within. Bryn brushed at her hot eyes, shaking her head. But then there were arms around her, and she couldn't fight it any longer. You fool, Leah whispered. If you loved him, then you would be good enough, Bryn. You would always be good enough. If you were honest and true to him, you would make him happy. She pushed away, unable to stomach those words or the warm embrace. I can't be the one for him. I have a debt to repay. I have a fate to fulfill, an oath to renew. I am bound by my past, and the road I walk doesn't have room for him at my side. Valkyries were wed to their oaths, to Odin and Freya. Lovers were encouraged, but never for long. The sisterhood meant everything. Their oaths meant all. She couldn't have both. To love him meant giving up everything she'd ever yearned for, everything that had kept her on her feet for the last 100 years, moving stubbornly forward. Or she could... What? Forsake it again? Spit on her mother's grave? Give up her mission of vengeance? Turn her back on her sisters once and for all? The idea made her feel sick. It was all she'd ever had, all she'd ever earned. And without it, what was she? Who was she? A mercenary? A cold, bitter, bruised woman whose only value lay in the strength of her sword arm? Leah squeezed her biceps. And once your debts are paid, what then? Will you be happy without him? Because it doesn't sound like this fate you strive for is one you've chosen for yourself. The answer scared her. She opened her mouth, but the words wouldn't come out. Nobody had ever asked her if she was happy. She was Valkyrie. She had fulfilled the destiny her mother had planned for her. She'd made her mother happy. And then she'd lost it all. But will you be happy if you return to Valhalla? Will vengeance fill that hole within you? Will justice make his loss seem worth it? She froze. When I was younger, Bryn, my mother told me that happiness doesn't come from other people's expectations. Happiness cannot be found when you try to be what others want you to be. What do you want of your life? Who do you want to be? Gods, she didn't even know. Bryn curled her fingers into a fist. I don't want to disappoint anyone. I don't want to hurt him. I don't want to start something I cannot finish. I think it's far too late for that, is it not? Leah glanced pointedly to where Tormund was staring at them with a faint frown on his brow, as children tugged at his shirt. The breath escaped Bryn. He will love you, if you let him, Leah said, patting her hand as she moved to rescue him from the children. But the question is, will you let yourself love him? Do I have to kill her? Tormund asked, as Bryn stared moodily into the small pyre of kindling she'd put together, as if she could light it with her gaze. She blinked. Who? Leah. You've barely spoken a word since this morning, and she made you cry. Don't think I didn't notice. Bryn looked away into the dark forest, night settling over her like a mantle. It was nothing. She was warning you not to break my heart, wasn't she? Bloody cousins. Some part of him had desperately wanted to take Bryn home and introduce her to his family, but the damage had been written over her all day. Don't worry, sweetheart. I'm made of sterner stuff than most men. I'll heal. Are you? Bryn whispered. She told me about your father. The words froze him on the spot. I don't know my father. Then she told me about Sigurd and your brother, Thomas. Well, fuck. He kicked at a scuff of dirt. Aye, what of them? You don't speak of your father. You don't speak of a lot of things, and so, if you want a secret, then I will trade you for a secret of your own, Bryn. Once upon a time, she would have scowled at him and stalked away, but she merely fed a handful of twigs into her little pile. A secret for a secret, then. Tell me about them. His heart gave a little trill. He hadn't expected her to agree, but she was clearly curious. There's not much to say, he shrugged when she shot him a glance. There's not. I can't remember old Sigurd. He died when I was 2. I'm told I don't resemble him, nor my brother, and the whole bloody matter of my birth earned me nothing but their contempt. And they never let my mother forget her shame. It was what they did to her that I'll never forgive. She sketched a rune in the dark with a twig. Håkon said you were desperate to forge your own name. I thought it was just a chance to be like him. Håkon Dragonsbane. But it's not, is it? Tormund clasped his hands between his thighs. Well, hell. You're really aiming to get under my guard tonight, aren't you? Don't you seek the same? If only she knew. He glanced down at his hands. I want my own name. I want... It wasn't greatness that he searched for. It had never been greatness. You know, I've never told a single soul this, but Thomas used to call me that bastard. He was kinder than his wife. She used to refer to me as Ruth's shame. I used to tell myself that it didn't matter what she called me, but I still felt it. Because it wasn't me she denigrated. It was my mother. And I always thought if I could make a name for myself, if I could be someone great, then I would tell them all that I was Ruth's son. I wasn't her shame. I was her gift, her pride, her joy. I don't think you need to forge a name for yourself, Bryn said softly. You already were her joy, and everyone who meets you knows she gave the world a gift. You're the type of man who drags an enemy over his shoulder and carries him to safety. You're the kind of man who makes little girls smile and little boys worship you. She took a deep breath. You're the kind of man who makes a woman doubt herself. Herself? He asked gruffly. Everything she's ever believed in. But there was no joy in her eyes as she said it, merely a distance as her gaze returned once more to the fire she was trying to light. And he knew she hadn't resolved those doubts. Their days together were growing shorter. They'd made headway today, gaining several miles upon the keepers. There was little sign of Ishtar yet, but he suspected they were only a day behind the keepers now they had horses. He needed to push her. Now that you know that, I believe you owe me a secret, my lady love. Bryn struck her flint. What do you want to know? How did you become Valkyrie? Tormund asked as he watched Bryn blow on the small tinder she'd just lit, fanning a tiny flame. She glanced up, flame flickering off the green of her eyes. I told you my mother left me on my father's doorstep one winter when I was barely 4 or 5 months old. A small muscle ticked in her jaw, and she fed a twig into the flames. She left a note for me to come and find her when I was old enough, if my immortal blood was beginning to show. My father burned it, and his wife was the one who told me of it. And if your immortal blood didn't show? Then I stayed in the mortal realm. I would not be worthy of Valhalla. There was so much more to that statement, but he didn't dare put it into words. Her mother's love had clearly had a price to it. So if your blood never showed, you would never know her? I would never know her. And your father was not kind, he murmured. No, he was not. Every glimmer of expression vanished from her face. He accepted me into his household, for he believed in his Christian duty. But as the years passed, it became clear I wasn't human, nor were my gods his. He would punish me for daring to say I could see them in the skies and hear them in the thunder. His lectures and prayers felt like someone was dragging iron over flint. I was a child of the Desir, and the prayers of a foreign god felt like someone was screaming inside my head. He thought me the devil's child, and turned me from his door when I was 9. Mother of dragons. Tormund scratched at his beard. It made a great deal of sense. This entire journey she'd held him at arm's length, tolerating his kisses and sharing a bed with him, but granting him little more of herself. For the first time, he felt as though he understood why. She'd been abandoned by her mother as a child, offered a mother's love only when or if she showed promise. And her father... But you found a place with the Valkyrie. A soft smile touched her lips, as if she was picturing a memory. I did. For a while. It's the only time I've ever felt as though I belonged. She clasped her hands together, rubbing at her knuckles. We called each other sisters. We swore we'd have each other's backs until the day we died, and we worked together to pass the tests and prove ourselves worthy to rise to the ranks of the Valkyrie. The smile died. The only downfall was Rota. We were the best of our training group, each of us vying to become the ultimate champion. All I wanted to do was win. I craved it so fiercely, I spent hours forcing my body to its limits, so that I would be undefeated when the final tests came. I wanted my mother to be proud of me. I wanted... She swallowed hard. I wanted to prove myself, and I cannot help thinking that if I had only been a little less determined, if I hadn't won, if I hadn't been so arrogant when I defeated Rota, then my mother might still be alive. Rota killed her because of me, because I took her place and my mother's love, and she could no longer bear to be left in the cold. Shit. Tormund went to the dirt before her, resting a hand on her knee. I'm so sorry. The only things I had in the world were my sisters and my calling, and Rota took them from me. Bryn held out her trembling hands, showing him the gold tattoos inked into the skin of her wrists. These tattoos chain my powers. I woke in the dirt of this mortal realm, with my Valkyrie side suppressed and my mortal side in ascendancy. I am still half Valkyrie. I don't age. I heal within seconds, and I cannot be killed by a mortal weapon. But my mortal side weighs me down like an anchor. I can no longer hear the gods singing in my ears. I can barely see them in the world around me, and my strength and speed are almost mortal now. I was cast from my home, and now I have no home. Now I have no family. It was that, perhaps, that hurt the most. He could see it in her eyes. All those years of striving to find her place in the world, and she had finally achieved it, only to have it torn from her grasp by the cruelest of lies. Tormund squeezed her hand. And your sisters? Those that argued for you? Have they visited? Have they spoken to you? Bryn shook her head. It is forbidden. I am in exile, shamed. A glimmer of fury burned within his chest like a hot coal. If they were truly your family, then they would not have rested until you were granted true justice. Those may be your rules, Tormund, but they are not mine. Those that are mortal born must fight to enter Valhalla and earn our wings. Once I was cast out, then my sisters would have lost everything if they risked contacting me. He bit his tongue on the reminder that she was only half Valkyrie. It was clear which side she rejected and which side she yearned for. But could he blame her? Her mortal father had cast her out when she was barely old enough to survive. Only with her mother had she found something. It sounds like you take the scraps of acceptance they grant you and deem it love, he muttered. But that's not love, Bryn. If Håkon and I were in the same situation, and he was cast out for a crime he didn't commit, then I would tear Valhalla apart to get him back. It wouldn't matter how much it cost me. True love has no cost. It has no price it won't pay. Bryn pushed to her feet and paced past him. You don't understand. They fight to protect the world from Ragnarok. It is a god's calling, a sacred duty. And that's what you want? Yes, it's what I want. There was a fierce glow of hope in her eyes. Solvig gave me the signed letter from Rota, confessing to my mother's murder. Once this job is done, then I can clear my name. I can rejoin my sisters. I can leave this place. Every inch of his heart felt like lead in his chest. But to argue with her, To try and demand that she stay with him, that she choose him above her immortal sisters, would only shatter the pair of them. She wasn't human, not truly. And he could see the way her hope breathed new life into her veins. She'd been cold and ruthless when they first met, like a wolf cub savaged by the hardest of winters. She'd been lost and lonely, her heart battle-scarred and heavy. But this was spring settling over her heart. He could see it in her eyes, see it in her sad smile, see it in the breathless way she trembled as she told her story. Maybe it was a poor facsimile of love that she strove for, but it was all she had. And if he didn't let her go, then that glow would fade. Her smile would vanish, perhaps forever. And she would always carry this wound deep inside her. "Then I will help you." Those words were the hardest he'd ever had to say. "Once we have found our missing princess, then I will see you to Valhalla. I will help you find your redemption." Bryn's gaze focused upon him as if she'd woken from a dream. "You don't have to do that. I'm the one repaying my debt here, not you. You owe me nothing, and I will help you because I love you, because you are my friend, my lover." "And what of us?" "There is no us." She'd made that clear, and until she had confronted her past, there could never be a future for them. Bryn fell into silence, as if he'd somehow stolen the words from her tongue. "To finding a missing princess," she finally whispered. "And then Valhalla." 23. The following afternoon, Bryn knelt, pressing her fingers into an indentation in the snow. She glanced up at the sky and the soft flakes drifting from heavy clouds. It had been snowing steadily all morning, which meant the keepers weren't far ahead. "They're barely an hour ahead of us, I think, and moving fast." She roved forward, finding the bare footprints of the dreki princess. The horse at her side snorted, its breath blowing hot in the chill air. Hers are shallower. Despite her bare feet, she's somehow managing to stay just ahead of them. Every now and then the princess's trail disappeared, but the keepers pressed on, perhaps guided by some invisible force, and invariably, after a mile or two, she would find trace of Ishtar. "Why would the keepers stay in mortal form?" Tormund asked, trudging through the snow behind her. "Foreign territory, perhaps? Or perhaps they cannot sense her when they're in the skies. Perhaps they're reduced to tracking her the way we're doing. Perhaps." It was the most words they'd shared all morning. Bryn tipped her flask to her lips, watching him stand outlined against the sky. A fight brewed within her, but he'd already won it. She'd expected him to make some sort of demand upon her last night, to insist that what they shared was worth fighting for. But he'd merely squeezed her fingers and promised he'd help her find her way home. What did you expect? That he would beg? Bryn squeezed the pendant around her throat. Perhaps a little part of her had wanted him to beg her to stay, to make her choice for her. It was easier this way, cleaner. Neither of them would part with their hearts broken. But an angry, jagged little piece of her felt cheated. He'd given her everything she'd ever wanted, but the taste of it was as bitter as poison. Seer floated out of the gloom, her ghostly wings brushing against Bryn's cheek as she soared to the next tree, and then looked back at them as if questioning whether Bryn would follow. She'd spent her entire lifetime following that call, her life bound to Freya's. but for the first time, her feet felt as heavy as her heart. Sia cocked her head, then preened under her wing. "We'd best move out," Tormund called, slinging his pack over his shoulders. "The snow's getting heavier, and we're going to have to seek shelter for the night soon." Bryn let go of the pendant and screwed the lid on her flask. One last night together. She'd recognized how close they were to finding their prey. The keepers moved slowly, as if having trouble tracking the Dreki princess. For all that she and Tormund were mortal, or near enough, they seemed to be gaining ground. Tomorrow they would have them. And then what? She would have to make a choice. "Did you have anything in mind?" Bryn muttered. "That," he called, pointing to a rocky overhang and the shepherd's hut that perched upon it. "I'll get the fire going." Bryn rubbed her upper arms, nodding briefly as Tormund moved toward the cold stone fireplace. It was barely a hut. Wind howled through a crevice near the door, but the stone walls were thick and would keep the worst of the snow at bay, and the shelter outside would protect the horses. "As much as I appreciate your intentions, I think it's going to take more than a fire to keep warm tonight." The storm had blown in as they climbed the bluff, until her cloak threatened to strangle her. "If you're asking whether I intend to share my bedroll," he called over his shoulder, "then you have the subtlety of Thor's hammer." "Mjolnir." She tossed her own bedroll in the corner and unknotted the ropes that bound it. "Perhaps I was merely commenting on the cold. Perhaps you're the one who lacks subtlety." Bryn screwed up her nose. "This hut stinks of wet sheep." "Not the worst place I've stayed in. Hawken has a talent for finding the smallest, shittiest hellhole in every town we ever visited and insisting we stay there." He struck his flint, and a tiny flame caught. "Why follow him all these years?" she asked, shaking out her bedroll. "Hawken said you traipsed at his heels to the end of the earth and back. He said he told you to leave him 1,000 times or more, and you wouldn't. Why?" Tormund blew on the coals, earning a hot spark that flickered and then caught in the kindling. He sat back on his heels and fed more dry bracken into the meagre flame. "Because he needed me." "So you gave up your entire life to protect his?" She'd seen his family and the life he'd left behind him. For an orphaned child, it must have seemed a heaven of sorts. Tormund rested his palms on his thighs and looked up at her. "He is my cousin." More of this nonsense about love. Bryn's knuckles tightened as she tugged sharply on his bedroll and laid it next to her own. "You had a life," she said, "and he was so consumed with his own loss that he barely spared your sacrifice a thought. That's what you said. You could have died many times over. You could have married, had your own children. Why?" "Are you trying to understand why I followed him, or are you trying to understand what sort of a man I am?" "Both?" Or maybe she was trying to define what love truly meant. His words of the other day lingered in her heart like a festering wound. Was this love? She'd thought she'd known once, as she shared in a celebratory hug with her sisters. They'd laughed and drunk themselves stupid after surviving the trials. For the first time in her life, she hadn't been alone. Sisters forever, they'd promised each other. But where was Ragnhild now? Where was Lena? When her exile was pronounced, she'd met their eyes and given them a grim nod, a sign that she would make this sacrifice so that she wouldn't drag them further into this mess. But had they ever fought for her? Would either of them have made such a sacrifice if they'd stood in her place? Or did they grieve her and then forget her? Did they ever even spare her a thought? Bryn stared down at the bedrolls, her eyes hot, The closer she came to her goal, the harder it was to keep putting one foot in front of the other, especially when this man turned everything on its head. Bryn? She shook the thoughts off like water from her cloak. Doubt was a death blow in her world. You never answered my question. Why give everything for him when he was so consumed by his grief that he gave nothing back? Tormund squatted on his heels, watching her with those implacable eyes. He saved my life once. Did I tell you that? Bryn shook her head. Tormund sighed and fingered his side, where she'd once traced her fingers over the enormous scar that ran across his ribs. If you ever repeat this, I will deny it to my dying day. But when we were younger, Håkon was the type of young man that drew all eyes, even mine. He was a gift of the gods to our village. Tall, handsome, and blonde. He won every race. He could outfight any other young man. And the girls loved him for it, though he never looked twice at them. And then he met Ardis. I don't think he even knew what it was that we saw in him. We all wanted to be him. We all wanted to be his friend, and I more than most. Because of your father, she whispered. His lips thinned as if he'd bitten into something sour. There were boys in the village who liked to call me names to make themselves feel bigger. Bastard, giant spawn. I shrugged them all off, but there was one name they called my mother, and I couldn't let that go unchallenged. I was bigger than most of them, had a temper on me too, unsurprisingly. I spent most of my days picking fights until Håkon dragged me out of a pack of rowdy boys and told me I was shaming myself. He said, real men don't pick fights with those who are smaller than they are. I took that about as well as you could imagine and tried to shove him in the river. Well, it turns out he's a right mean little prick when he wants to be, and he knew a few more tricks than I did. Tormund shook his head. Damn near broke my fingers, forcing me to yield. Bryn sank down onto her knees on the bedroll. And then he gathered those boys off to the side and had a quiet word with them. He told them I was his cousin, and that if they spoke even a single word against me or my mother, then they'd be having words with him. Tormund breathed out a laugh. You had to know him back then. You had to see him. He was 2 years older, built like Thor's younger brother, and could wither your privates with a single stare. Every boy in my village worshipped him, and he chose me, the village bastard, as a cousin. You're not related? Not by blood, no. You said he saved your life. He did. Each and every day afterwards. Tormund flashed a grin and then lifted the hem of his shirt. Did you think these were earned from some dashing adventure? I used to tell the ladies a vicious wolf attacked me when I was a child, but the truth is, I tripped and fell against a scythe when I was 16. Damn near gutted myself. Bryn shook her head and threw her bag at him. You would. He caught it with a laugh, but as he lowered it, the laughter died. He did save me, Bryn. He saved a sad and lonely boy from thinking about just jumping in that river and letting it wash him away. His eyes grew distant. He told his mother about me, and the next thing I knew, I was moving into their homestead and living in a set of rooms over the stables. Håkon put a sword in my hands and told me that if I was going to get into fights, then I'd best damned well learn how to defend myself, because I couldn't throw a punch for shit. And so he taught me. I can never repay him for that. She felt that pain echo through her. All along she'd thought that he had never known true loneliness, but it was clear he still worshipped his cousin. And now she knew why. Because when you grew up with so little to call your own, you cleaved to those who gave you the barest scrap of love. I swore then that I would somehow repay the favour. I promised myself that if Håkon ever needed me, then I would be there. And so I have been. I am his shield when he needs someone to watch his back. I am his axe when his arm is faltering. I am the one who guards his sleep when he is too deep in his cups to guard it himself. And I was the one who never let him lose hope when he realized Ardis had abandoned him. It was more than she could have ever hoped for from her sisters. This was love. And not the love that she'd heard in all the stanzas, but the kind of love that burned like dragon fire. It was sacrifice, not passion. It was putting another before your own needs. Everyone is a little lost at some stage of their lives, and sometimes all you need is a helping hand to guide you through those stormy nights. Håkon thinks he failed me. He never failed me. He found me. He helped me find myself. And so, when his wife vanished without a trace and his heart broke, I decided he needed me to bear his burden for a while. Tormund gave her the sweetest smile she'd ever seen on a man. And so I did. My shoulders are broad enough to carry any weight. It turned everything she had ever known about this man on its head. No wonder he was so loyal. And then, of course, without him, I had nothing else to stay for. No pretty girls? He flashed her a smile. Many, but none who stirred more than my fancy. She wanted to ask, why me? But her tongue wouldn't let her. And yet, as always, he saw right through her. Do you know what first caught my eye about you? Bryn's lips thinned. I'm fairly certain I know exactly what caught your eye. After all, men had been drawn to her figure for centuries. He shook his head. Oh, you're pretty. The kind of pretty that punches a man in the throat and sets his balls on fire. But no, that's not what made me realize there was more to you than first assumed. When I slew the Draugr? Aye, you near on ripped my heart out of my chest with such a move, he admitted. But no, not that either. She honestly couldn't think of a single thing. We were leaving the inn in Groa that first morning, he said, and there was a girl begging in the village square, and you reached into your pouch and dumped a handful of coins into her cup. I caught a glimpse of her face, Bryn, and I saw those coins. They were solid gold. And here you were, telling the world how much coin meant to you. You've spent weeks telling me how heartless you are, how mercenary. You've told me 1,000 times not to trust you, that you know no mercy. But I never forgot that moment. Nor had she. The girl shivering in the cold. It reminded her so much of her past that she'd barely bothered to count. She could always earn more coin. But for that girl, the gift was one of life. It caught my eye, because that's what I want in a wife, he continued. I want someone who will guard the weak. I want someone who doesn't even hesitate when it comes to gifting others. I want someone who's going to stand between me and an enraged dreki queen who can breathe fire and give no quarter. Tormund, and maybe it won't be you, but one day, he told her, his voice roughening, I will have my own wife, my own family, and I will be her axe, and her shield, and the one who guards her while she sleeps. My children will never suffer a single nightmare, for they will know their father watches over them. and should an enemy seek to harm my family, I will make them wish they had known the mercy of Fenrir." "She will be a lucky woman," she said softly. He knelt on the bedroll before her. The way he cupped her face in his hands and stared into her eyes left her breathless. "Don't. Please don't say it." It would ruin everything between them, and perhaps he saw it in her eyes, for his own half shuttered. And then he was leaning down to brush the softest of kisses to her lips. "Yes," he mused, his thumbs caressing her cheeks. "She will be a lucky woman." The dream tore Bryn awake, her heart pounding in her ears. She suffered a moment of disorientation, the clang of steel still ringing in her ears, and the flash of Tormund's startled face turning toward an invisible opponent, before the dark of night finally soothed her. The fire had burned low, the last lick of flame gilding the sculpted line of Tormund's brow, and he snored under his breath, as if no nightmares plagued him. Bryn sat up, swallowing hard as the blankets pulled in her lap. Tormund snorted under his breath, his arms thrown slackly across her hips. Damn it! What had that nightmare been about? She used to suffer them when she was younger, flashes of premonition that warned of the day ahead. They always occurred before battle, though she'd not felt prescience grip her like that since she was cast out of Valhalla. "It's just a dream," she whispered to herself, wiping sweaty hair back from her eyes. Slipping from beneath his grip, she placed several logs on the fire, then paced the hut until the sweat along her spine had dried. Maybe it was the thought of his loss that had awoken her dormant sense of prescience. Maybe she was seeing a glimpse of him, far away in the future. Or maybe her mind was conjuring thoughts because in her heart of hearts, she couldn't fathom not having this enormous sleeping giant at her side. Bryn slipped back into the blankets, snuggling into his embrace. His earlier words still struck at her like hammer blows. This man, this gentle giant who laughed at the world when the world tried to kick his feet out from under him, was unlike any other she'd ever known. Loyal, brave, selfless. The kind of man who would give his life for his cousin without a single hesitation, for he loved him. The kind of man who would protect the weak and shoulder any burden. Nothing like her. She rolled onto her back and stared at the roof, a gaping hole in her chest bleeding mercilessly. She didn't even know herself anymore. Years on this mortal plane had abraded the very core of honor from her being, until she'd become little more than a cold, ruthless mercenary. Odin's breath. What had she become? No longer a hero, for sure. No longer fierce and fearless and bound to serve a higher purpose. Sitting up, she dragged the furs around her shoulders. It would be easy to surrender to Tormund's conquest. She'd seen it in his eyes when he spoke of the wife he would one day protect. Her. He'd been thinking of her. She could have it all. Tormund's warm arms around her, his child in her belly, a home, a belonging. And what will you give him? More betrayal, more lies. Bryn slipped from the blankets once more, moving as silently as she could. There was no point trying to sleep again. The future he promised wasn't the one she'd spent all these years fighting for. If she chose him, then she could never return to Valhalla. She would never clear her name and fulfill her mother's legacy. And it ached that the choice should be so sharp-edged. To have one meant losing the other. He's mortal, she whispered to herself. and she would never age. No, she'd watch him die, watch him grow to hate her slowly over the years, watch any children they had wither and fall to the sharp edge of mortality. Bryn glanced over her shoulder toward him. The kindest thing she could ever do would be to leave him, before this evolved into something she couldn't escape. 24. The storm finally abated. Tormund shoved the door of the shepherd's hut open, blinking at the shock of blinding white snow that greeted him. He ventured out, wading through the snow. Everything was quiet and still. Snow slid off a nearby fir, but not a single creature stirred out there. "Well, there goes our trail," he grumbled, turning around and almost walking directly into a half-naked dreki. "Rah!" Sirius yelled in his face. Tormund staggered back with a cry, landing on his arse in the snow. His heart leapt through the roof of his mouth, and he gaped at the one-eyed prince. "What the hell are you doing here?" he yelled. Sirius was laughing too hard to answer. Behind him, Marduk merely shook his head, though his lips twitched with a faint smile as he held out a hand to haul Tormund to his feet. "I have been waiting to do that since we landed." Sirius howled with laughter. Bryn exploded from the hut, flames licking up the sword in her hand. She paused when she saw their companions. "Mother of Jesus!" Tormund clapped a hand to his chest and turned away before he did something foolish, like drop his axe on his own foot. "When did you two arrive?" Bryn lowered the sword and extinguished it. 15 minutes ago, Sirius said, taking his time and stretching. "I was going to kick the door in and scare you, but Marduk reminded me that that wouldn't have been very polite. Besides, your mortal warrior was whispering some sweet, sweet words in your ear at that stage, and I thought we'd best leave the lad to—" "Were you trying to give me a heart seizure?" Tormund snapped, pointing at the smug warrior. "We've been tracking your cursed keepers for days. I thought you were them." "Do I look like a tattooed virgin who's not allowed to even look at his own cock?" Sirius sneered. Tormund blinked. "What?" "The keepers are fanatics," Marduk said. "They're not all virgins, though they're supposed to avoid the company of men or women. Mates and bedmates are a distraction from their sacred duty." "It's no wonder they're fucking miserable," Sirius replied. Tormund eyed the bastard. "Ah, you've been snuggled up in Marlin's arms. That's why you're in such a good mood. Where is Håkon?" "With Ardis," Marduk replied. "Håkon's got her locked away in some little hut near Rurik's volcano." He shook his head. "My spoiled older sister is living in a hut. It must be love." "It's love," Tormund sighed under his breath. "It gets a little sickening at times, but it's better than seeing him weep manfully into his ale." He straightened. "Did you find the queen?" Marduk shook his head grimly. "I found a necklace in the vault that once belonged to her. It reeks of her magic, but there's a crack in the emerald, and the light inside it has faded. It must have been some old spell lingering. Why are the pair of you here?" "Our beloved king," a wealth of sarcasm sneered in Sirius's voice, "insists that we return with his long-lost little sister. He heeded our warnings about Amadea and the chaos magic, but he seems to think Ishtar is the priority. Rurik is concerned that if the keepers get their hands on her, they'll kill her," Marduk said flatly. "Rurik is also of the opinion that if we want to discover whether there is any remaining taint of your evil bitch mother's chaos magic around, then the best way to track her down is to use another chaos wielder. and with Ardas's magic still so new to her, Ishtar seems to be the best alternative, Sirius added. Bryn's eyebrows arched. Are you entirely certain we're capable of containing Ishtar's magic? And will she work with you? She seems to have her own aspirations, namely freedom. She will come with me, Marduk said firmly. She knows me, and when we were trapped in those caves, she started to listen to me. Tormund exchanged a glance with Bryn. Is this before or after she set off a cataclysmic chain reaction among all the volcanoes down the east coast of the continent? Marduk turned toward the north. She will come. Get your things. We need to find her before the keepers do. Flying over the countryside was so much better than riding a horse, though it had cost him a handful of coin to have them stabled. Tormund whooped and bellowed as Sirius wove between clouds, challenging Bryn and Marduk to a race. Bryn shook her head at him. Were you dropped on your head as a child? She yelled. He grinned, holding on to the strap that was secured around Sirius's body. Why not enjoy it, love? You never know when it will be your last chance to ride a dreki. I thought you were afraid of heights. His gut dropped. You had to mention it, didn't you? Bryn turned into the wind, her face devoid of expression. Then she shook her head, a smile escaping her. You're a fool. Race you to the mountain. She leaned forward as Marduk banked and dove down, his wings flat against his side. Her red braid whipped behind her, and her cloak tore itself free in the downdraft. Did you hear that? He yelled down to Sirius. Sirius banked and began to plummet. I have ears, you idiot. The words sounded as though they came directly from the dreki's mortal mouth. Tormund reached out, snatching Bryn's cloak out of the air. He could barely breathe, his hair whipping in his face and his heart racing. If he died tomorrow, then he would never regret this moment. And if he lived, well, he'd never forget it. They dropped like a stone, Sirius's greater weight swiftly catching up to Marduk's. Down and down, with the mountain's sheer sides growing larger. Sirius knew what he was doing. He'd shattered enemies with a single storm and battled through the darkest nights. He'd been flying for well over a century, surely. He definitely wouldn't hurl himself directly into the mountain. Tormund's yell of glory was just about to turn into a scream when the enormous black dreki abruptly banked and soared along the sides of the cliff. Sparks raked off the stone, as though the black frost was running his claws along his sides, and Tormund swore he could hear the bastard laughing in his head. By the time they landed on a rocky outcrop that hovered above a beech forest, Tormund was fairly certain his stomach was several miles behind them. He fell from the dreki's back, landing on hands and knees on the blessed, sweet soil. Mother of Jesus, he whispered, bending low to kiss it. What's wrong? Sirius purred, shimmering back into mortal shape. You look a little pale, friend Tormund. You could have warned me. Sirius gave him a perplexed look. Warned you about what? His expression suddenly lightened. Did you think I was going to slam into the cliffs? Foolish mortal. I rule the skies, and I wasn't about to let that puny princeling beat me. Not funny. I nearly shat my trousers. Sirius was still snickering as Bryn alighted with Marduk. Grinning at him madly, she slung her leg over Marduk's withers and slipped down his scaled side. That was wonderful. Are you all right? I thought I heard a little girl screaming, but it seems to have stopped. I hate you all. He staggered to his feet, offering her the cloak that was clenched between his fingers in a grip that might need to be pried open. "None of you are even remotely amusing." He pointed a finger at Sirius. "Friends, do not scare the devil out of friends." "If you trusted me, then you wouldn't have been scared," the enormous dreki warrior said with a shrug. "As if I was going to end my life as a mere stain upon the stones. I'm the Black Frost." "Quiet." Marduk suddenly held up a hand, walking toward the edge of the cliff, wearing naught more than the trousers he'd hastily hauled on. "I can hear Ishtar's song." His face brightened. "I couldn't sense her for a while, but now she's back on this mortal plane." "Where the hell is she going when she passes through her portals?" Tormund muttered. "We don't know," Marduk replied. "There are other realms out there, and some of them can be reached by the portals in the Hall of Mirrors at the Zinni Court. Since those portals were created by Chaos Wielders, she may be able to slip into other realms, and time moves differently there. Or, I don't truly know. Portal magic wasn't something I paid a great deal of attention to when I was younger. Unless it wore a skirt, you didn't pay much attention to anything," Sirius said. "I thought you were too busy murdering dreki to know what I was or wasn't doing as a kid." Sirius bared his teeth, but Tormund clapped a hand on his shoulder. "Ishtar. Let's focus on Ishtar. Where is she?" Marduk concentrated, his head turning slowly to the mountain. "Up there, I think. It's more of a generalized location rather than a pinpoint." "Let's move," Sirius said, "and be prepared for anything. Her magic is unpredictable. Besides, those keepers have been on her trail ever since we left Kamchatka," Marduk muttered. "They're still out there somewhere." They slipped down the hillside and crossed a river. Marduk abruptly froze. "I can smell those cursed keepers. They're close." Sirius looked up at the slopes of the mountain ahead of them. "This way. She's gone up the cliff face." Tormund craned his neck. "She climbed that? That frail young woman?" "Dreki," Marduk corrected. His balls tried to shrink into his abdomen. "Nope. That was a nope. Have I ever mentioned my distaste for heights?" "Frequently," Bryn said. "All the time." This from Sirius. Marduk looked between them and then shrugged. "Once or twice?" "I'll take to the skies and see if I can spot her," Sirius said, transforming. He launched into the skies with a thrust of his wide black wings. Tormund swallowed as Marduk set himself into the climb, finding handholds in the sheer rock and hauling himself up. It seemed odd that Ishtar had climbed the cliff. He and Bryn had been tracking her for days, and whenever she'd encountered a physical obstacle like this, her tracks simply vanished, found several miles to the west perhaps, or in the middle of a forest. The princess was no fool. She'd managed to stay ahead of the keepers after all, and they were legendary trackers, according to Marduk. What was it about this mountain that had drawn her to it? He looked up at the stark cliffs. High in the sky, a flicker of wings disappeared into a cloud bank. Sirius, prowling the night like an overgrown bat. "If she's on that mountain, then she'll stand out like a signal fire," he muttered under his breath. Bryn set her foot on a piece of rock, and chills broke out down his back. "I don't think I can do this," he admitted. "You rode a dreki, Tormund. I know, but that's different." Marduk crawled up the cliff face as though he was part lizard. "I don't know how to explain it. When I'm on Sirius's back, I'm strapped to him, and if I go down, he goes down." He looked up, his gut twisting in a huge knot. There was this time in Sweden when we were hunting a dragon, and I had to climb a mountain. I couldn't do it. I knew Håkon and the others were ahead of me, waiting for me to join them, but my body just froze. Håkon had to slay the dragon by himself, then come back and rescue me. Bryn stepped down from the ledge, her hand resting on his forearm. I'll be beside you. He shook his head, backing away. I'll only slow you down. There's a small track over there, he said, pointing to the right. You follow Marduk. I'll try and join you. Tormund. An icy sweat dripped down his spine as a sudden gust of wind nearly blew them off the plateau. Just go. Marduk will need help with Ishtar, and if those keepers are up there, he'll need a sword at his side. I'll find you, I promise. Bryn stared at him for a long time, then stepped closer and kissed him. Don't get yourself hurt. Then she turned back to the cliff. And yell if you need us. Marduk can send Sirius back down. He watched her crawl up the cliff, the strong muscles in her thighs bunching as she swiftly followed Marduk. The sight made him feel sick. And perhaps if Sirius hadn't dropped from the skies like that, he might be in better condition to attempt it. No point dwelling on it. He watched until Bryn had cleared the first part of the escarpment, then looked across a narrow ravine, eyeing the curve in the track. If he got a run up, he should make it. Backing up, he resettled the axe. Blowing into his cupped hands, he stared across the... A flutter of movement caught his eye. Tormund froze as a pale-faced figure dashed through the long grass below and into the forest. And then he blinked. The princess had doubled back on her tracks and was now heading in the opposite direction. She'd never intended to take the bare, rocky mountain paths after all. Mother of dragons, he hissed, glancing up. There was no sign of either of the dreki nor of Bryn, and no means of contacting them without also alerting the keepers. Bryn! He tried to call softly. Sirius had made contact with him mind to mind, but Tormund had no means of reaching out. Bryn! He half yelled. His voice echoed through the ravine, and he winced. Hopefully Sirius was in a position to see him. Lose Ishtar, or follow her? Fuck, he cursed, ripping a shirt from his pack and tying it around a branch so Bryn would be able to track him. Run into a dark forest, Tormund. Follow a magical dreki princess who doesn't want to be caught. All alone. That sounded exactly like something he would do. Where the hell was Håkon when you needed to blame him for a rash decision? Sirius soared around the top of the mountain, craning his neck to see below. Mist obscured the lower flanks of the mountains, but he caught a glimpse of Marduk and Bryn following Ishtar's path. Where the hell was Tormund? He dipped down, riding a thermal. There was no sign of the keepers, no sign of Ishtar. And why would she be climbing this particular mountain anyway? He closed his eyes, opening up the third eye that allowed him to see beyond the mortal plane. There were 5 flaring hearts of gold throbbing in the skies ahead of him. Dreki. Sirius roared a challenge and saw Marduk's head snap up. Then he was wheeling toward the intruders, cutting through the clouds like a scythe. The lithe black female in front soared forward to meet him, her cohort hanging back. He recognized her immediately, and this time it wasn't merely rage that made his heart squeeze in his chest. I thought I told you I would kill you if you followed us, he sent, circling his mother. The pair of them whirled slowly through the air, keeping an eye on each other. I'm not following you, Zoya snarled. I'm following her. Can't you feel it?" "Feel what?" "World's end," Zoya told him. "This mountaintop is where the mightiest circle was erected to create a portal to Alfheimr. This is where the king of Alfheimr staged his invasion all those years ago, and for some reason, the girl has been moving directly toward it ever since she left my lands." "The only way you would know that is if—" "I had someone follow you." Zoya dipped her wing sarcastically. "Of course I had someone follow you. I told you of the power she has. Do you think I would allow her to roam free? If her magic doesn't overwhelm her, then she could get herself killed." Sirius's nostrils flared. Whoever it was, they were good, for he hadn't even sensed them. "Something's not right, Sirius. She's not acting at all like herself." "Maybe she's finally free of your prison." "It wasn't a prison," Zoya snarled. "It was meant to protect her and keep her safe. She likes the dark. She likes the warmth. The world can be too bright and loud for her at times, and this is not the first time she's escaped. Once a month, she likes to watch the moon rise, though we always find her in the same place. Ilarion tends to unlock the cells and follow her from a distance. She says she talks to the voice in the moon." Zoya's wings dipped as she glanced down. "But she's never been able to evade us like this. I didn't think she had the capacity to do so. She will walk through a river, even though she cannot swim. She will climb a cliff because she wants to see the rocks at the top of it. She doesn't see the risk sometimes, not enough to lead nearly a dozen dreki on a merry chase like this. Nor does she like leaving the safety of her cave or our mountain range. She's a child of habit. Something's not right here." Her argument killed his rage. "Why would she be drawn here?" "We found runes carved into the walls of her prison. Elvish runes. She looks to have chiseled them herself." Though he'd been born after the Great Wars, he knew the Yorsalva constantly sought a way to return to the mortal plane in order to gain their revenge upon the dreki who had locked them out. If Ishtar had spent years hidden away in the dark, then how would she even know what elvish runes looked like? "She's the most powerful chaos wielder in the world," he said, half to himself. "One with the ability to create portals." And if Sirius was an elvish king with a thirst for revenge, then he knew exactly what he would do to gain it. But first, he would need a means to open the portals on this mortal plane that linked Midgard to Alfheimr. The thought left him breathless, for the Yorsalva felt like myths to him, though he knew they existed. Who had access to her in the caves? "Myself," Zoya replied, "Ilarion and Vadim. Perhaps one or two others of my personal guard. She nearly tore apart the throne room when she was 10, and I was forced to contain her. She nearly destroyed the court," which narrowed the pool of people with access to her. Somewhere out there, one of those smarmy, mincing elves was laughing at them. Sirius glanced toward the mountain below him. The clouds had begun to clear, revealing the top of the mountain. 12 enormous rune stones guarded the summit, like teeth that sought to consume the sky. Each rune lit up briefly as the light of the rising moon glanced over them, and for the first time he felt the underlying hum in the air, as if the ground within those stones vibrated minutely. "Fuck," he said, dipping his wing and plummeting through the skies. "We have to find her first." Because if she made that mountain, then the keepers and chaos magic might not be the worst thing they had to worry about. Tormund knew Ishtar was aware he was following her. She would stop at odd times, glancing back through the darkness and sniffing the air. But his presence didn't seem to bother her, and he was slowly able to gain ground. Moonlight spilled into the clearing as they came face to face. Ishtar whirled upon him. Silvery blonde hair hung in matted strands, and her skin was so pale that it looked as though she'd never seen the sun. A thin, stained kirtle covered her body, leaving her arms raw and welted with little bumps. "Easy." Tormund held his hands out, not daring to move. The dreki woman stared at him, the irises of her eyes beginning to glow green. "I'm not here to hurt you." Pressure urged him to move fast. Ilarion and Vadim had to be close by, and he didn't think he could fight off 2 dreki warriors by himself. But in doing so, he'd startle her. "I'm a friend Tormund. I know your brother, Marduk. He wants to help you. We all want to help you. Do you remember me?" Her nostrils flared. "Are you cold?" he asked. "You look cold." The princess tilted her face, examining him like a cat considering a mouse that had just confronted her. Tormund swung his fur-lined cloak off his shoulders slowly, and then held it out to her. "Put it around your shoulders, like this," he said, miming the action. Doubt and wariness turned her eyes almost human. The green glow faded until he could almost make out the emerald depths of her irises. "I'm going to help you," he said softly, taking a careful step forward. An inch, maybe another. Tormund gently slid his cloak over her shoulders, and she quivered like a newborn foal touched by a human hand for the first time. "It's nice and warm, isn't it?" he whispered. Ishtar's eyes widened as he drew the cloak tight around her shoulders, and she sniffed at the fur as if learning his scent. Suddenly, her nostrils flared and her head snapped sharply to the side, that violent green glowing in her eyes again. No, 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 damn it. He'd almost had her. And that was when he heard boots crunching over snow. "Back away from her, mortal," someone called behind him. Tormund whipped around, his hand falling to the hilt of his axe. Where the hell is Marduk? And Bryn? Even Sirius? The 2 dreki warriors stalked out of the forest as if they wore wings on their boots. Both of them towered over him by a good 3 inches, and their shoulders dwarfed him. He could weigh the odds when he saw them. He was going to die if he chose to fight. Right here, right now. They spread out from the birch trees, and one of them detached a weighted rope from his belt. "This doesn't involve you. You will live if you walk away." The older warrior snorted. "It would be best if we kill them all, liar. Dead men tell no tales." "That is not our purpose," the younger one replied, and Tormund guessed this was Ilarion. "We contain her magic. We protect the world." Vadim spat on the ground. Tormund found himself slowly shaking his head. "Perhaps you haven't heard of my name," he called in a gentle voice. "But my mother would have blistered my ears if I was the type of man who walked away from a defenseless woman." "She's not defenseless," Ilarion said coldly, starting to swing the rope. "She's a monster," said Vadim. "In my world, the monster isn't always the one with scary magic. Sometimes it's just the one who's trying to hurt the innocent." He drew his axe, staring the pair of dreki down. "I have hunted monsters. I know what I'm looking at, and she is not one of them. You cannot have her." "She was born from chaos," Vadim snapped, drawing a sword. "She will destroy the world if left to live unfettered." Perhaps she has the potential to destroy the world, but I think it is dreki such as you that will drive her to that fate. She needs kindness, safety, someone who will show her that the world is not such a bad place after all. She needs to be leashed, Vadim growled, or put out of her misery. Tormund shook his head. That's not going to happen. You will die, Ilarion said. Tormund hefted the axe with both hands. That fate is not yet set in stone. I'm not alone. You may have met my companions. One is a handsome prince who talks a lot and who thinks he can charm any woman he sets his sights upon. Normally, I wouldn't think him much of a fighter, but Ishtar is his sister, and Marduk's a little protective of her. The other is a surly, one-eyed bastard who thinks he's amusing. You may have heard of him. They call him the Black Frost, and he's killed hundreds of dreki. And then there's Bryn, and you really don't want to face her across the length of a sword. She will kick your teeth so far down your throat that you'll be shitting them for days. I'm not alone, and you don't have the time to kill me, kill the girl, and escape. So perhaps you should reconsider your options. If we kill the girl, then our own deaths will be a worthy sacrifice, Vadim replied. The world must survive. Damn it, true fanatics. Ilarion shook his head. You shouldn't have gotten involved in dreki matters, mortal. I don't want to kill you, but I will if I have to. The rope whistled through the air, wrapping around the head of his axe. Tormund tried to dig his heels in, but he was no match for Ilarion's brute strength. The axe went flying, leaving him vulnerable. Tormund turned to Ishtar, finding her squatting in the middle of the clearing, her eyes locked on him. Run, he told her. I'll hold them off. And then he drew his knives and faced the pair of dreki, alone. 25. Steel rang through the eerily quiet mountains. Ahead of Bryn, light flashed off the whirl of a weapon, and she could just make out the sight of Tormund lunging forward to catch the downward strike of a sword with a pair of knives. No, 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 no. Bryn sprinted down the mountain, her thighs aching. The fool! He was no match for two of the fiercest dreki she'd ever encountered. She prayed to Odin for swift flight, ignoring the pain in her body as she sprinted. Even as some part of her knew she wouldn't be in time. Each ring of steel upon steel echoed her nightmares. The flash of his face as he turned, barely fighting off the sword from behind, was exactly the same image she'd seen in her dreams. "Tormund!" she screamed, leaping from a rock and sliding down the shale-covered hillside. A storm of light whipped out from Ishtar, swirling into a whirlwind of intense green magic. It whipped high into the skies, tearing the leaves from trees. The two keepers were ripped away from Tormund, staggering in the wind. One slammed into the ground, his cloak whipping around his face. His sword clattered to the rocks below. Tormund clung to a tree as the vortex threatened to tear him from his feet. "Bryn!" His voice floated past her as the vortex exploded out from Ishtar, knocking Bryn on her arse in the snow. The wave of magic seemed to explode out through the world, and above them, the mountains started to rumble. Bryn looked up in horror, clutching her sword desperately. Trees were flattened as the wave of energy smashed the world, and a slide of rocks started tearing down the mountain. Rocks creaked and groaned, and the wind that circled the heart of the storm smashed her down into the snow, barely letting her catch her breath. All her worst fears came true. Ishtar could tear apart the world if left to flourish. The Volva of Groa had warned them about this, and Bryn could see it happening right before her eyes. This was barely the beginning. Queen Zoya had warned Sirius that the princess's powers had been contained for so long that Ishtar was only just starting to work out how to use them. Imagine if she stood at full strength. Ishtar would be able to tear the top off a mountain or part the seas. She'd be able to break apart cities and smash humans in her path. She could set off an unstoppable chain of cataclysmic events. Bryn had to stop this before Ishtar lost control. She had to contain the princess's magic somehow. One of the keepers rolled to his feet between her and Ishtar, his gaze locking on the princess as he darted for his blade. The girl didn't even see him coming. She stood alone in the circle, her hands clamped over her ears as magic poured from her. Drawing her sword, Bryn scrambled to her hands and knees in the catastrophic winds. Hair whipped her face, and her cloak was torn from her shoulders, vanishing into the whirlwind. "Ignite!" she screamed, lifting the sword. Fire blazed along its shaft, but the wind seemed to steal the flame from the edge of the metal before it could reach the tip. As she watched, the sword extinguished itself. Cold steel would have to do. Bryn locked eyes with the dreki keeper. He brought the sword up as she lunged, and steel screamed on steel. Bryn spun into the stroke, suddenly within his guard. She hammered her elbow into his face. As he staggered backward, she threw herself into the vortex of swirling green magic, trying to reach the girl first. Icy spears slashed through her skin as chaos whipped past her and through her. Heat burned deep within her as her Valkyrie side healed her. It felt like the magic was trying to take her apart and put her back together again. But it was wrong. It burned. She could feel her body weakening as the chaos magic slowly began to undo her. For the first time, she could hear the song Marduk spoke of, the shriek of enraged magic hurtling past her. "Tormund!" He couldn't survive this. He had no immortal blood. He had no protection from the gods. He was just human, weak in so many ways, though his heart was strong enough to shield the world. Bryn took another step through the vortex, strips of skin peeling from her face and cracks forming in her lips. Another step. Her bones ached now, as though it was eating her from the inside out. "He will die, and you will never get the chance to hold him again. Never get the chance to tell him how you feel." Bryn screamed in rage and surged into the eye of the storm, gasping as the magic spat her out into the center of calmness that surrounded Ishtar. The skin along her knuckles split as she flexed her sword, and then healed as she watched. A golden rune burned bright on the back of her hand, and then faded. Several others flared to life on her arms, and then vanished too. Bryn took a step and felt her blood firing through her veins, burning away the cold as her Valkyrie side roused. It had been so long that she felt as though she was made anew. What had happened? Had Ishtar's magic stripped away the bindings that constrained her immortal side? Or was this Freya's will, filling her with strength so that she could stop Ishtar before the magic consumed her? Either way, nothing was going to stop her now. Bryn set her jaw. "Stop!" Tormund slammed into her, driving them both back through the vortex. He hauled her tight against his chest. "Don't kill her!" "I wasn't going to kill her!" She could feel the magic threatening to tear the world apart. Bryn gritted her teeth, trapping a scream. She needs to be stopped somehow. She'll destroy the world. This was the start of Ragnarok, trapped in dreki flesh, though not all the signs had come true. Above them, the skies roiled. The moon vanished as if Skoll and Hati had eaten it. The world plunged into darkness until all she could see was the green fire in Ishtar's eyes. The two keepers crawled toward Ishtar, their faces grim, but a dreen spirit dreki tore itself from the magic and lunged toward them. One of them screamed, throwing his hands up to protect himself, but the other touched the dreki, and the spirit form disintegrated in a shower of sparks before turning to his brother. "She just needs a chance," Tormund yelled in her face. A chance? The girl had the power to tear the world apart. Bryn shook her head. "We can't risk it. She could crush us all. Can't you see that?" "All I see is fear," he yelled, his arms flexing like steel bands. "If we give in to fear, then that is all she shall ever know, and your prophecy will come true." He didn't understand. She'd trained for this her entire life. Stopping this sort of destruction was what she had pledged her life to. It went against everything she'd ever known to even contemplate allowing the girl to go free. Tormund let her go. "Trust me," he told her, their fingers gripping and their eyes meeting. "Trust me." Bryn's breath arrested in her lungs. "One chance," she whispered, and lowered the sword. Tormund stepped toward Ishtar, his hands held low. "Remember me?" he called through the vortex. "No!" Bryn scrambled toward him, but she lost her feet and the wind smashed her back into a pair of rocks. "Tormund!" The fool would die. He had no magic, he had no armor, no weapon. He was mortal. The magic would tear the skin from his bones. "Tormund!" Crawling to her hands and knees, she lifted her head as he took a step toward Ishtar. Bryn's breath caught in her chest as he lunged through the rest of the vortex and fell into the eerie calm that surrounded the dreki princess. Ishtar dug her fingers into her head as if it ached, but he held his hands up in surrender, and Bryn could see him mouthing something as he bent to pick up the cloak at the princess's feet. The shower of chaos sparks stopped hissing and were blown away harmlessly across the snow. Ishtar looked down at the cloak Tormund held, and he took a careful step toward her, talking all the while. Moving ever so slowly, he draped his cloak around Ishtar's shoulders. The vortex trailed into a wisp of wind, lashings of chaos magic sparking across the snow. Bryn's jaw fell open as Tormund slowly wrapped his cloak around the princess. "You're safe now," he told her, tying the cloak under her chin with bloodied hands. "Nobody will hurt you. You're safe. Safe." He kept repeating the word, as if Ishtar might come to understand it if he said it often enough. Those huge hands came to rest upon Ishtar's shoulders, and the chaos died in her eyes as she looked up into his face. The winds vanished. The magic died. There was nothing but a bare, windswept circle where the vortex had hissed. For a second, Ishtar looked like a young girl, confused to find herself amidst the wreckage of this snow-swept cliff. "Oh." Bryn sat back on her heels. He tamed the rage with a kind touch, soft words, and a warm cloak. The world was filled with such silence. Snowflakes drifted down out of the grey skies. Behind the pair of them, Bryn could see Sirius and Marduk pushing to their feet from where the storm had battered them. She hadn't even seen them arrive. And beyond them, a dark-haired keeper knocking an arrow to his bow. It felt like the world slowed down. Bryn lifted her arm to cry a warning, her heart slamming into her throat. "Tormund!" His head jerked toward her, and then he turned to stare into the path of the arrow's flight. It was like watching fate unfold. Tormund jerked the princess out of the way of the arrow, shoving himself into its path. Of course he fucking did. Even as she watched, Vadim drew his bow. She'd never reached Vadim in time. She couldn't reach Tormund. Bryn staggered to her feet, clasping her hands together as she tried to summon the weapon that had long forsaken her. "Please, oh please, oh please, grant me strength, great Odin." Desperation swept the veils from her mind's eye. Suddenly she could feel an immense force quivering through her. A god turning his focus upon a once loyal servant. Power trembled through her, almost searing her from the inside out. The ability to summon pure lightning dancing from her fingertips. Lightning lashed from the sky, striking toward the dreki warrior. Ilarion stepped forward, deflecting the strike with his own elemental magics. It was all she could do to summon one bolt, and even that left her on her knees, gasping for breath. But it was too late. As she lifted her head, she saw Vadim's arrow fly true. Bryn followed the path of the arrow, the world slowing down to a breathless second as it arced through the air. "No!" she screamed as the arrow sank into his chest, driving through the weak leather body armor he wore. The sound it made would echo in her memory forever. "Tormund!" He staggered back in shock, the cloak falling from his nerveless hand. Startled brown eyes met hers, as if, even in that moment, he couldn't help look for her. "I will be your shield. I will be your axe. I will be the one to watch you sleep." But who had ever been his shield? The scream that tore from her lips crashed across the world as all of her old fury rose. But she was helpless to do anything but watch as the man she loved slowly toppled backward like a felled oak. Ishtar screamed, and the winds whipped up around her again, more violent than ever before. And then she vanished, her magic inking out so swiftly that it left shocks of after-image in Bryn's eyes. Sprinting up the hill, Bryn slid to her knees at his side. "No, no, no." Her heart skipped a beat when he gasped in a sharp breath. Still breathing. But her eyes saw the damage, even as her trembling hands clamped around the shaft of the arrow. No mortal man could survive this. There was blood everywhere, and his chest heaved as he tried to suck in a breath, a terrible wheeze whining through his gaping mouth. "Damn it!" Sirius slid to her side, his hands trying to stem the blood flow. "What happened?" "We have to cut it out of him." The words were hers, and they were cold and distant, as though another voice spoke them. Sirius looked up, and in that moment she saw all her fears coalesce into being. "No," she spat. "No! I will not have it! I will not let him die! Heal him!" "I can't," he told her grimly. "The arrow's lodged right next to his heart. The second we remove it, he'll die. I won't be able to heal him in time." "But, Bryn..." Tormund's hand closed around hers, his chest wheezed, but he tried to squeeze her hand. Hot tears almost blinded her. "You fool! You stupid fool! Why?" Because he was the shield that guarded the weak. She dashed the tears from her eyes. She could feel his grip getting weaker, hear the rasp of his breath. All those years trying not to let herself feel anything, and he had slipped beneath her guard when she wasn't looking. "Don't you leave me," she whispered fiercely. "Not when I've only just started to love you. Don't you dare leave me." She channeled all her fury and rage into that moment, stirring the air, feeling the storm brewing both within her and without. The very air vibrated, and Sirius gasped. "Odin, All-Father," she prayed, "please spare this man, for he is a warrior like no other." But great warriors were taken for Valhalla. They were not given renewed breath or life. They were not spared. She could feel the implacable mercy of the gods sweep over her. The world froze, and out of the lightning stepped a figure, burnished armor gleaming and the light refracting back off her round shield. Her blonde hair was pulled back off her face in dozens of braids, and a ruff of fur shielded her shoulders. The Valkyrie strode forward with a relentless step, her blue eyes flashing lightning and her swan-like wings gleaming. Of course, Ragnhild. Tormund had been the most valiant of the valiant, a man who swore his shield to the protection of others, a man who laughed into the face of death. He had fallen whilst trying to protect a dreki princess. All the world would know of his name and sing it in the songs until the end of time. Of course, a Valkyrie would come for him. Bryn scrambled to her feet, drawing her sword as she stared at the sister she had once pledged to love. "You cannot take him." Ragnhild curled her lip with a sneer. "And who are you to stop me? You are the honorless, the betrayer. You besmirch this brave man's ending with your presence." Bryn glared at her sister over the length of her sword. Memories tumbled through her mind's eye. She saw the pair of them grappling, laughing, wrestling in the grass as they prepared for their final trials. She saw the snaking tattoo that wove down Ranghild's arm, the one she had put there herself. "Forever sisters," they both whispered as they clasped hands. "Back to back, until the day we fall in Ragnarok." And for the first time, she felt no shame. "You cannot have him," Bryn said in a quieter, firmer voice. "This man is my own, and I will not let anyone take him from my side, whether they be god or Valkyrie." "That is not for you to decide." "Yes, it is," she whispered, suddenly seeing a way. Slicing her palm along the edge of the sword, she clutched at the falcon pendant around her neck. "I ask Freya for mercy. Blessed Freya, please accept my sacrifice, my immortality for this man's life." The ground began to shake beneath them, and lightning split the skies. "Freya accepts," the older Valkyrie said. "Your powers for your mortal's life." It wasn't just a sacrifice of her power that Ragnhild was asking of Bryn. This would mean the closing of the gates of Valhalla to her, once and for all. It would mean the end of all her hopes that she could ever go home. No more could she call the Valkyrie sisters. She would never see her mother's grave. And she thought of all she'd suffered since she was cast down. Not once had her sisters comforted her. "You are unworthy," they had said, and turned their back upon her. Every day for the last 100 years, she'd striven to prove herself. She'd toiled through blood, sweat, and her own tears to be deemed worthy. And for what? She saw in her sister's eyes the disgust, the sneer curling her lips. No matter what Bryn did, she would never regain her former place in Odin's halls. Indeed, she could barely remember what it even felt like to ride the lightning. No, What filled her heart now wasn't the desire to be a god's servant, ruthless and fierce, but the sensation of falling asleep in her gentle giant's arms. The way Tormund's voice had softened when he told her that his mother would like her had made her heart soar, and the quiver of fury that rumbled in his chest as he promised to be her axe and her shield had been the quiet roar that stilled all her doubts. All these years of longing to return to her home, and in the end, it wasn't even a choice. This time, she would be his shield. "I choose him," Bryn said fiercely, her eyes hot. "I choose Tormund." And Ragnhild's face closed over. "So be it," she said. Time sped up, the heat of the lightning strike slamming into Tormund's chest. Bryn screamed as the arc of the bolt went through her, searing every nerve in her body. She came to, splayed across his body, her head resting on his chest. The Valkyrie was gone, and so too was the whip of energy that filled Bryn's veins. As she lifted her trembling hands, she saw the glow subside, leaving her skin pale and freckled and mortal. But his heart was beating again. 26. "Where did Ishtar go?" Marduk demanded. Sirius swallowed the lump in his throat as the big man started breathing again. Thank the gods. Being mated to Marlin had turned him as soft as porridge, and he'd been damned close to a tear there. No need to show it, though. "Ishtar?" Marduk's gaze shifted unerringly toward the top of the mountain, and Sirius knew in his heart of hearts what had happened. His breath caught as a raging green firestorm suddenly appeared on the top of the mountain. Shit. Ishtar had reached the summit and the circle. "There's something wrong," Marduk said, wearing a frown on his brow. "Her song sounds different." "Stay here and protect Tormund," Sirius told Bryn. He stretched his arms wide and flung himself into the air as he shifted. "Ishtar's reached World's End. There's a circle there that leads directly to Alfheimr. Something drew her here." "Alfheimr?" "Yes." He sent the grim thought on a psychic thread. "I think this has been your sister's destination all along, though I don't know if it was of her own volition. We have to stop her." Marduk cut through the air beside him in dreki form. "Agreed. Where did the keepers go?" "If they're lucky, they have fled. And if not, then I'll kill them." They landed just outside the circle, taking care not to startle the dreki princess inside as they shifted back into mortal form. Sirius caught a glimpse of his mother soaring in slow circles above them with her dreki cohort. But as long as she didn't interfere, she wasn't his problem. Ishtar traced shimmering green shapes in the air in front of each of the 12 runestones with her finger. As she finished each figure, it flared a brilliant green for a second, before the corresponding rune carved deep into the stone lit up. They weren't the only ones there. Both keepers stalked to the outside of the circle, as if they too were wary of entering. The largest one saw him, and Sirius smiled. "This one is mine." "Can you take them both?" Marduk demanded. "I'll stop Ishtar from opening the circle before she links both worlds." It was a surprisingly smart option from the reckless prince. "Get her out of here. I'll take care of the keepers." The prince stepped between the stones with a hiss of sparks coruscating over his skin. Sirius's knuckles cracked as he flexed his hands. In the distance, thunder rumbled as the storm answered his mood. Any conflagration of power from all dreki involved could set off a monumental storm of epic proportions if they weren't careful. The two warriors spread out, spears held low. He needed no weapons. He was the weapon, and as the storm clouds brewed behind him, he saw it in their faces. Opening his third eye, Sirius focused on their hearts, beating like gold drums before him. Thin gold filaments spun away from their chests, carrying life through their veins. All it would take would be a single thought to start freezing those pumping organs, and the flows merely parted around the other dreki and unravelled into the winds. He couldn't feel their hearts, couldn't taste the ice on his tongue. It was as if his magic ceased to exist. Voids. The youngest keeper shot him a savage smile. "Something wrong, Blackfrost?" So be it. Sirius settled into a defensive stance. He'd always wanted to fight a void. "Nothing particularly bothering. We'll just have to do this the old-fashioned way." "Be careful," his mother warned. "Vadim has never been beaten in combat, and he's twice as ruthless as his brother Ilarion. But they work together, always, and that is where their strength lies. Take down one and you will beat them both. Vadim is the eldest, and he favours his right side slightly." It wasn't as though he needed her help. "I can defeat anyone," he snapped, before dissolving the psychic link. The one he assumed was Vadim lunged forward, his spear snaking to the right. Sirius dodged, but Ilarion was slicing in from the left. He whirled, capturing the shaft of Ilarion's spear and driving it toward his brother. It narrowly missed Vadim's chest. The pair of them broke away, sharing a glance. "Did you think I earned my reputation purely via my magic?" he sneered, holding out his hand, palm up, and then mockingly encouraging them with his fingers. "I'm going to spit on your grave," Vadim said, and the pair of them moved forward together. This time they didn't underestimate him. This time they both struck at once, and it was all he could do to keep himself from bleeding. He twisted and spun, using his forearms to divert their blows. But Vadim snuck under his guard, the blade of his spear slicing through the muscle in his thigh, and as Sirius grunted and staggered, Ilarion's spear glanced off his ribs. Each wound sizzled, as if they'd poured hot acid into his gaping flesh. He could feel it eating away at his muscle, diverting the innate dreki magic that sought to heal him. Fuck! What was on their spears? Zoya sprinted toward them, launching off a rock with her spear raised high. Shadows rippled over her black-clad form, and her scream of rage was almost shattering. Where the hell had she come from? She must have been shifting as they spoke. She landed beside him, slapping Vadim's next blow aside as Sirius staggered, still trying to recover from the wound to his thigh. "Zoya!" Vadim rasped. "Get out of the way!" "No! This is my son!" The shock of that word ricocheted through Sirius. "Here!" she said, tossing Sirius a short sword. He almost threw it away, but whatever poison coated their spears was still working to hobble him, and though he was getting better at fighting with only the sight of one eye, he still wasn't at his full strength. "Still, I don't need your help. I was handling this." "You know not what you face," she ground back, looking so much like himself that he almost blinked in surprise. "And I wasn't asking." "Get out of the way," Vadim repeated. "I won't offer again." "No." Zoya lifted her chin high. "I won't repeat myself again." You swore you would contain the girl. You swore that you would stop her from escaping. Vadim growled. You broke your oath, and now it is time for us to do what we should have done in the first place. Ilarion shot his brother a sharp look. Ishtar doesn't need to die, brother. We stand at world's end, Laria. She's about to open the portal to Alfheimr. Vadim snarled. This is not a mere portal on our plane. This is interdimensional. It's a fucking rainbow bridge between worlds. She'll never be able to control so much power, and if she can't control it, then it will tear this world apart. There were 9 realms that Sirius had heard of. Asgard, Alfheimr, Jotunheim, Midgard, Muspelheim, Nidavellir, Helheim, Niflheim, and Vanaheim. Some might have been merely creations spawned by the fertile imaginations of the peoples in this world. The only ones he knew existed in truth were Alfheimr and Nidavellir, because his people had once battled the Yosalva and the dwarvish Svartulva. He glanced toward the runestones. Could Marduk do it? Could he convince his sister not to open the portal? Ilarion's lips pressed thinly together, and he lowered his head for a moment as if thinking. She will not open the portal, he finally said. So be it. I'll take Vadim, Zoya said. There was no time to argue with her. Ilarion attacked with a sharp lunge that ended with his spear slicing across Sirius's knuckles. He riposted, but the bastard was deadly swift and focused now. Intent burned in his dark eyes, and Sirius's hand was starting to go numb from poison. Damn it. He countered 1 attack, 2, the 3rd raked inside his guard. Sirius lost the sword and barely managed to avoid the bastard's next slash. His hand burned, and the muscle in his thigh was twinging now. The next blow scored along his ribs. His knee buckled beneath him as he dodged, and he grabbed the shaft of the spear as he fell, wrenching it from Ilarion's hands. Landing on his arse in the dirt, he bared his teeth as Ilarion merely unsheathed a dagger from his belt. Never thought I'd see this moment, the bastard said. Here you are with all your vaunted might, and you're practically on your knees before me. Sirius's eye narrowed. Heat flashed through him as the storm inside him lashed out. His long hair whipped in the breeze. Magic couldn't touch the bastard, but that didn't mean Sirius couldn't use it. Lifting his clenched fist, he tore rocks from the ground around him, huge groaning stones lifting unsteadily out of the earth. Ilarion froze, his eyes narrowing as Sirius smiled through his teeth. Magic won't touch you, he said, but it's a shame you can't fight off gravity. He flung the wave of rocks at the void. Ilarion dodged, but one clipped his shoulder, and he was spun off his feet, landing in the dirt. Sirius took his time gaining his feet, flexing his shoulders as he fisted the spear. He glanced at its tip and sniffed the poison-coated blade. Just so you know, this will sting. He feinted forward, and Ilarion dodged, but the spear was never the real attack. Sirius flung a hand, and a rock smashed into the void's temple, throwing him backward. Ilarion hit the ground, his senseless body catapulting over the edge of the mountain ruins and vanishing into darkness. One down. Sirius smiled to himself. Defeat me? Never. He turned to stalk Vadim. His mother and the void fought dramatically, their steel whirring in soft hands. Though Zoya had warned him about Vadim's prowess, she'd clearly underrated herself. The void was on the back foot, his face taut with fury as she pressed her attack. Zoya grunted, shoving the spear deep into Vadim's shoulder. "I haven't always done the right thing by Ishtar," she grated out, "but I won't let you hurt her." Vadim bared his teeth, and then he drove himself forward onto the weapon, grabbing a fistful of Zoya's shirt and hauling her toward him. It happened in an instant, and Sirius saw her gasp in shock as Vadim embraced her. "Do you think you can stop me?" Vadim whispered as Zoya fell back. "Zoya!" Something wasn't right. Sirius could see it in the way she swayed. Her knees weakened, and then his gaze dropped to the bloodied knife in Vadim's hand, the knife he hadn't seen until that moment. Every inch of him went cold. "Long live the Queen!" Vadim mocked. Blood dropped from Zoya's fingers as one of her arms fell against her side. Each droplet hit the ground, and the echo it made ricocheted through Sirius's chest. Splash, splash, splash. The bearded dreki fanatic bared his bloodied teeth at Sirius before wrenching the spear from his shoulder. He kicked Zoya in the chest, and she staggered backward, tumbling into Sirius's arms. "You only have time to save one Black Frost. Your mother or the girl?" Vadim turned and walked into the humming whirlwind of power that lashed the portal, the bloodied spear in hand. Sirius squeezed Zoya tightly as she collapsed against him, and then he saw the damage as she gasped, blood welling between the fingers she clasped over her chest. "No," he said breathlessly. "No, no, 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 no." But the second he opened his third eye, he could see the truth. Vadim's knife had struck her right through the heart. "Ishtar!" Marduk yelled, one arm flung over his face as he staggered through the storm of chaos magic. It felt like hours as he gritted his teeth and fought the rage of pure chaos. Strips tore from his skin, and the magic stung as though it was cutting through him. But he couldn't leave her there. He had to stop her before she opened a portal she might not be strong enough to withstand. Shadows flickered at the other side of the runestones. A tall, bearded form appeared, splashed with blood. Marduk lowered his arm as Vadim moved toward Ishtar with a spear in his hand. They stood at opposite sides of the circle with Ishtar between them. Marduk would never reach her in time, but he grasped the wind with his magic, using it to hammer the keeper. Launching forward, Vadim grabbed Ishtar and hauled her into his arms, setting the tip of the spear to her throat. "What now, princeling?" The wind whipped past Marduk, howling down through the valley. The strain of wielding it drove down upon his shoulders, as if he was handling it physically. His knees threatened to buckle. But he wasn't the only one handling power. Chaos magic burned in Ishtar's eyes as she opened her eyes. Above them, a vortex of eerie green began to whirl slowly to life, sucking the energy from the marrow of the world. Mother of dragons. Marduk's jaw dropped open as Ishtar called the portal to life. He could sense the sudden yawning distance as if the portal snatched onto its destination. 1,000 colors flickered to life within the circle, and he could have sworn he saw a rainbow bridge stretching into infinity. She'd done it. She'd linked both worlds. "Ishtar," he whispered, because he could feel her knees weakening, feel her hold on the magic slipping through her fingers as they linked. Something must have shown on his face, because Vadim glanced up. Chaos magic might slough off the bastard, but his sister was clearly no fool. And now she was free of her warded prison. There was no checking her power. Vadim screamed as the portal sucked at him like an enormous hungry mouth. The spear was torn from his hand, and Ishtar's dress blew back in the wind as the portal enveloped them. "No!" Marduk yelled, leaping forward, but the portal evaporated with a hiss, leaving only clouds and bare earth behind. Little sparks of chaos fizzed in the air, and then there was nothing but the piercing squeal of Bryn's Merlin as it soared overhead. And his sister, stumbling out of nowhere to her knees in the dirt, with a happy smile on her face. "I did it," she told him. "I set the world right." Marduk slid to his knees in front of her, hesitating to grab her hands after the way she'd reacted last time. "Set the world right? What do you mean?" He glanced around. The rune stones hummed, the runes still lit up with green fire, though they remained inactive. Something didn't feel right. If he concentrated, he could feel the ground shivering far, far below him. "He was locked away," she whispered, "and he wanted me to release him from his prison, and so I did, but I had to break the chains first." "Who? What chains?" "My friend, the voice in the moon, and these chains." She sent him a sudden flurry of images through the bond, though he could barely make any sense of them. The portal, silent and quivering, its power suppressed, and little golden runes stamped over each stone that had been patiently carved by a circle of long-dead dreki warlords as they bound the circle into silence. Marduk blinked back into the present. There was no more humming, no more violent cascade of colours. The portal was closed, but it had been opened once, and as he looked at each runestone in turn, he saw shivers of the boulder crumble into fine powder. No more runes lay dormant there, waiting for the moonlight to strike them just so. And he could sense a heaviness in the air, as if power stirred through the mountain, just waiting. "Ishtar," he was breathing heavily. "What did you do? Who is the voice in the moon?" "I'm not supposed to tell anyone." "You can tell me. I'm your brother, your twin brother." And then she said a name that made the bottom of his stomach drop through his boots. "He calls himself Tundir." "The king of Alfheimer's most brutal warlord." "Don't you dare die," Sirius snapped to his mother, blood welling between his fingers as he tried desperately to stop the bleeding. Her heart. The spear had nicked her heart, and he poured his magic into her, trying desperately to stem the blood flow internally and heal each and every last broken capillary. It was taking too long, and he wasn't fast enough. Every time he patched a vessel, another required urgent attention, and then the first would start to leak. He couldn't do this. He couldn't save her. Zoya clapped a weak hand over his. "Let me go," she whispered in his mind. "You're overtaxing yourself." "No." "I'm the fucking Black Frost," he snapped, as a pain began to grow behind his eye. "I can do this." "I loved you." He could sense flickering memories pouring through their bond. A little boy running through the grass and laughing. Him, and he could feel the smile on her face as she watched him, feel the love that poured down the bond between them. "I loved you so much it broke my heart to leave you, but I had to. I wanted you to know that." He shoved her out of his mind so he could concentrate. It was too late. Her heart pulsed once, twice, and he was more killer than healer, though healing was merely a matter of reversing the flows. For all his power, he was absolutely fucking helpless right now. Bare feet padded toward him, and Ishtar appeared, her gaze locked on Zoya. Marduk hovered at her side, and though he looked troubled, his face paled when he saw the body in Sirius's lap. "I can't heal her," he whispered to Marduk, though he meant the words for himself. Not fast enough to prevent the bleeding. A wheezing breath escaped Zoya, her hand half lifted toward Ishtar, and then he felt her body slacken into his arms as she gave one last exhale. No, no. His grip around Zoya tightened as he hauled her into his arms. "I love you." The words broke over his tongue, but it was too late, for she was gone and he'd never had a chance to speak them because of his own fucking pride. He felt Marlin reach out to him across the distance, as if she'd sensed his sorrow, the gentle caress of her touch wrapping around him as she realized what had happened. "Oh, Sirius," she whispered in his head. "I'm so sorry." And suddenly, it didn't matter that his mother had never been there. She had chosen an innocent child's life over his because she had believed that what she was doing was right, and she'd failed them both in so many ways, but he forgave her for it. Only now, it was too late. A single tear slid down his cheek as Marduk reached out to squeeze his shoulder, and that alone nearly fucking broke him. "Mother?" It was a voice he'd never heard before. Green light flooded the world. Sirius looked up as Ishtar reached out, a ball of pure power blazing around her hand as tears ran down her cheek. "Wake up," she whispered. His heart sank like lead. "She's not going to." Her power touched Zoya's chest, and the light sank into the ravaged wound there, flesh searing as her skin swallowed that glowing orb whole. Zoya jerked, her spine arching and green power spilling from her lips and eyes and nose. And then suddenly there were two Zoyas, the one in his arms and the green spirit form of her body hovering just over her flesh. It was like watching everything in reverse. Sirius's gut roiled as he sensed the world blurring around him. Zoya's spirit form lurched to her feet, wrenching her body along with it. He could almost sense a shadowy form kicking her in the chest, and then she was jerking forward into the shadow's arms. A sharp inhale, and then a spear of actinic green formed in her hands, and she stepped back into a defensive position while the shadow faded. And then the two Zoyas came together, the spirit form sinking into her flesh. His mother cried out, falling to one knee, the glowing spear fading in her hand as she shuddered and clapped a hand to her chest. Sirius scrambled to his feet, the heat draining from his face. "Mother?" Zoya sucked in a soul-ravaged breath and looked up, her eyes wild and lit with chaos magic. They were no longer blue, but an unearthly green. "What happened?" Zoya rasped, looking down at her shaking hand. "Ishtar." He had no answer for her. This wasn't healing. It wasn't anything he'd ever seen before. Zoya had been dead, her soul preparing to launch itself into the skies to ride the horizon forever. "I reversed time," Ishtar said. Sirius gaped at her. "Chaos magic has no bounds," whispered his tutor's voice in his head. "It is the magic of the goddess herself, as wild and untamed as she was. It is outside time and space, and though certain dreki can wield barely the most minute levels of its power, the possibilities for what a true chaos wielder can do are endless. But there was one more thing his tutor had said that struck him. That does not mean that such magic is without consequence. He looked around. The circle still shivered, waiting, lurking, and there was no sign of either void. But he couldn't hide the feeling of dread premonition that itched down his spine. He reached out to draw Zoya to her feet, squeezing her hand when he felt the warmth of blood pumping through her veins. This shouldn't have happened. It was a miracle. Or was it? Ishtar staggered against Marduk, rubbing her fist against her temples. "I want to sleep now." And Marduk caught her as she slumped unconscious in his arms. But Sirius couldn't help looking around. Because if Ishtar had inverted time itself, then what else had she reversed? 27. Everything hurt. Everything. Tormund coughed, and he swore the inner linings of his lungs tore free. Rolling to the side, he tried to hack the lump loose. "Here," said a familiar voice, and there was a bowl in front of him and a gentle hand caressing the back of his neck. He collapsed back on the bed when he was done coughing, blinking at the ceiling. Even his eyes hurt, and he was fairly certain Bryn was sitting on the edge of the bed, holding a glass of water like some sort of angel of mercy. She tipped the glass to his lips and helped hold his head up so he could drink. Nothing had ever tasted as good as that water. But he was still confused. "Did I die?" he rasped, his voice sounding like an angry bear's. There were fingers in his hair, gently stroking his skull. Gods, it felt good. "Are you here to haunt me?" "Haunt you?" Her voice rose. "Is that any way to speak to the woman you love?" His heart skipped a beat. "I thought love was a god's trickery, a lie that mortal men tell themselves to console them for the misery of their pathetically short lives, a means to control their women." Bryn's fingers stilled in his hair. "Those were words I told myself before I met you," she admitted gently. "Because I knew there was nobody in the world who loved me, and sometimes it aches less to deride such a notion. Sometimes you don't feel so lonely when you make a mockery of something that everyone else seems to have except for you." "You were always destined to be loved, Bryn. I just hadn't been born yet." Tormund captured her hand. The backs of his eyes ached, and he could have sworn there was ash in his lungs. "What happened? The last thing I remember is—" His thoughts skittered away. A swirling green vortex of magic. An arrow. Pain. "Holy shit!" He clapped a hand to his chest. "He shot me. I thought I died." Bryn curled under the covers with him, sliding her arm across his midriff, which was another unusual event. "Yes," she finally whispered. "You died." Shock sent an icy splash of water through his veins. He froze. What? How then was he breathing? How then was he holding her in his arms? Horror tiptoed down his spine. He grabbed her arms. "What did you do? What the hell happened to your eye?" There was a jagged lance of gold slicing through the iris of her right eye. "Perhaps you should ask what happened to yours," she murmured. He clapped a hand to it, but it felt no different than the other. "You were dying," she whispered. "One of my Valkyrie sisters appeared in order to take you for Valhalla." I had no other choice. I offered my life for yours, my immortal life." He sat up abruptly, a hollow forming in his midriff. "What does that mean? You're mortal now?" Bryn closed her eyes. "As mortal as you are. Great Freya does not give her children gifts without a cost. She demands a sacrifice to prove the gift is worth it." "No, wait. But Valhalla, your sisters, are no longer my sisters," she said firmly. "But you had your confession. You had—" "I burned the confession," she told him stubbornly, and then she smiled. "I don't need it anymore. I don't need that pathetic excuse of redemption. I don't need vengeance. It was nothing more than an anchor around my throat, slowly drowning me. You are all I have ever needed." "Bryn," he reached for her hand. "You would do that for me?" A tear slipped down her cheek. "How could I not? I love you, you big fool." The sound of the word on her lips nearly choked him. He'd not expected her to ever say it, let alone concede to it. She launched herself at him, wrapping her arms around him. A breathless kiss took him by surprise, but he barely had time to taste it before she was drawing back. "I couldn't bear to lose you. For everything I've suffered, my mother's death, my honor, Valhalla, you were the one loss I couldn't survive." Tormund curled his arm around her as she buried her face in his chest. He could feel the tremor through her back and cupped the back of her neck, rubbing her nape. "Easy does it, love. I'm still here." And then he closed his eyes and breathed her in. "I love you." A soft smile tugged at his lips. He'd dared to dream of those words, but there'd been a part of him that had never expected to hear them. "So, that's what it took to make you realize how amazing I am," he rasped. "A little near-death experience?" Bryn punched him in the ribs, but lightly. "Don't you dare joke about this," she growled. "I am trying to bare my heart to you, and all you can do is make mock?" Tormund caressed her face gently, urging her to lift her head. His thumb traced the curve of her cheek and the soft lushness of her mouth. "It's what I do when I'm afraid, or overwhelmed, or trying not to shed a damned tear." "Are you overwhelmed?" she whispered. He nodded as he sank back into the bedroll. "I've loved you from the moment I saw you, in one way or another. You were all my dreams breathed into life. You were everything I'd never dared hope for." He smiled. "And then you gave me a look that would have shriveled another man's privates and told me you weren't my sweet anything. I knew you'd lead me a chase, Bryn. I knew I would have to be patient and let you slowly lower your guard. But there have been times when I wondered if you ever would." She curled into his arms again, resting her head on his chest. "The moment I saw you, I knew you were a smooth-talking charmer who would try to win your way into my bedroll. Many men have tried, and all have failed. But there was always something about you that made me wary. Your smile, perhaps, or your eyes, or watching the way you cared for everyone around you. I knew you would be dangerous, because you had a way of disarming me even then. And now you're mine." He stroked his hands up her shirt, feeling the muscles rippling along her spine. "One could say, now you're mine, considering I bound my life to yours." "Yes, but I already put a ring on your finger, Bryn, and you accepted it." He lifted her hand, toying with the ring there. She stilled. The king of Ysalva's ring?
The very same.
He cupped one hand under his head and winced as a muscle in his chest pulled. Bryn lifted her head from his chest. That was offered as payment. Should I take you to see King Harold?
That was the moment you first let down your guard. You've been wearing my ring on your finger ever since.
Because it is powerful and sparkly, and I collect items that belong to the gods or great warriors.
Really?
He turned his face to hers.
It has absolutely nothing to do with the fact I gave it to you.
Bryn bit her lip, toying with the edge of his collarbone. Maybe a little. He captured her face, tilting his mouth to hers.
I'm going to marry you, you know, and I promise I will never betray you or vanquish you or belittle you. They'll sing your name through the ages, and they'll put my name next to yours, and together we will move mountains.
Do I have any say in that? She whispered, her breath stirring over her lips.
Yes or no, Bryn?
Yes, she moaned, leaning down to kiss him. 1,000 times yes. His tongue brushed into her mouth, sweeping in slow, deliberate strokes. Bryn's hand slid down the ridge of his abdomen and curled around his cock.
Fuck.
He took a deep breath and then winced as a shaft of pain near tore his chest apart. Of all the moments. Bryn paused. Are you all right?
I'm fine. Don't you dare let go of my cock.
But she looked down at him, and he knew the moment was lost. You're not all right, she said. Does your chest hurt? Can you cough? I thought you were fully healed. Sirius said he managed to clear most of the scar tissue from your lungs.
Easy,
he whispered, capturing her hands and tugging her down into his arms. It made his mouth dry to realize she was acting like a mother hen.
My chest is fine, though I feel a little bruised, and maybe hugging you will be enough for now, though I intend to make up for it when I am better.
His mouth pulled into a smile.
You said you'd marry me.
She rested her chin on his shoulder, hugging him tightly. A moment of madness.
I don't think so.
He caught her hand in his and squeezed.
The gods heard your pledge, and I'm going to hold you to it.
You would.
What happened to the others?
He looked around, noting the roof of the shepherd's hut they'd shared, not days past.
What happened to Ishtar?
She's safe and well. Marduk returned with her to Hekla. She paused. He was worried about something she said. He seems to think one of the Ysalva is on this plane and has been manipulating her. He wanted to get her safely within the walls of the Zinni court before they could contact other dreki courts and ensure the portal is closed indefinitely.
Fucking elves.
He wanted nothing to do with it. He'd done his penance. He'd survived this mad quest and rescued a prince. He'd nearly fucking died. This mess was none of his business, and he'd have to remind Håkon that they weren't getting involved.
And us? What do we do now?
Sirius has been waiting for you to wake. He said he would fly us back to the court. Something about the king owing you a king's ransom for helping find Marduk.
I'll give you half, he told her. I couldn't have done it without you.
Bryn shrugged. I don't need your coin, Tormund. I think I've won more than enough. She rubbed her hand across his chest. I have your heart, and it is worth more than all the magical relics in the world.
That's almost sweet.
I can be sweet.
When you want to be, my little hedgehog.
Tormund, she growled.
What?
He kissed her neck innocently. Don't make me murder you before you even marry me." He tapped her nose.
"It will grow on you."
"It will not grow on me." She bit his finger and he laughed, then winced again. Bryn's hard eyes locked on him.
"You're fine," he told her. "Give me a week and I'll be wrestling you into bed. Now," he pushed himself upright, "let's go find that overgrown lizard. I want to go home. I want to see Håkon again."
Bryn pressed her lips to his forehead. "I'll find him. Then we'll go home." But for the first time in his life, home did not mean the tiny village he'd been birthed into. Home was with the family he'd made, with Håkon and Ardis, even Sirius. And now Bryn.
"You're coming to Hekla?"
Bryn pushed to her feet. "I go where you go now." Her eyes lit up. "And Sirius told me there's an entire treasury full of magical gems and jewelry."
He pointed a finger at her. "Trust me, you don't want to touch those jewels. They once belonged to an evil queen."
"But she's dead, isn't she?"
Tormund sighed and flipped the blankets off his lap, sliding to the edge of the bed. "They're probably cursed."
Bryn gave him an impish grin as she backed toward the door. Cursed jewels, an evil queen haunting an ancient dreki court. What could possibly go wrong?
"I'm going to pretend you didn't say that," he growled, reaching for his trousers. "You don't dare the gods like that, Bryn."
Bryn winked. "But it will be such an adventure. And this time, you'll have me by your side, prepared to slay any dragons we come across."
"What have I done? You're as bad as Håkon," he grumbled, "leading me astray."
Bryn laughed, slipping through the door. And Tormund finally allowed himself a smile, because this time he was the one who got the girl. This concludes Storm of Fury by Beck McMaster, narrated by Gabrielle Baker. Copyright 2020 by Beck McMaster. This unabridged audiobook is published by Beck McMaster and was produced in the year 2021 by Beck McMaster, who holds the copyright thereto. Please visit beckmcmaster.com for more information about her books.